winter moon cast long shadows across the snow-covered pines as Hannah Reed ran for her life. Her breath came in ragged gasps, forming white clouds in the frigid mountain air. The bundle clutched tightly against her chest was slowing her down, but she'd sooner die than let it go. Behind her, the baying of hounds grew closer. Lantern light flickered through the trees like vengeful spirits, accompanied by angry shouts from the men of Blackwell Workhouse. "Find that thieving witch," Simmons' voice carried on the wind. "She's got the Indian baby." Hannah's boot caught on a hidden root, sending her sprawling into the snow. The precious bundle tumbled from her arms, the wrappings coming loose. A small cry pierced the night. "Shh, Charlie, please," Hannah whispered frantically, scooping up the copper-skinned toddler. His dark eyes, wide with fear, reflected the moonlight. "We have to stay quiet." The dogs were getting closer. Hannah could hear their excited panting, the crunch of snow under heavy boots. There was nowhere left to run. The steep ravine to her right offered no escape, and her tracks in the fresh snow left a clear trail. She clutched Charlie tighter, turning in desperate circles. A large shadow detached itself from the darkness between two massive pines. Hannah gasped, stumbling backward, as the figure of a man impossibly big stepped into a shaft of moonlight. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the shoulders broad as a doorway and a thick beard that covered most of his face. A long knife gleamed at his belt. Hannah had heard the stories whispered in the workhouse, the mountain giant who lived like a wild thing in the high country, who was said to have killed a dozen men in the war. Instead of attacking, the giant extended a calloused hand. "Come with me if you want to live," he said, his voice deep as thunder, but surprisingly gentle. The dogs howled no more than 100 yards away now. Hannah had no choice. She took his hand. 2 weeks earlier, the spring sun beat down mercilessly on Silverton's dusty town square. Wooden storefronts cast long shadows across the packed dirt where a crowd had gathered for the monthly workhouse auction. Townfolk fanned themselves with folded papers, faces a mix of boredom and cruel amusement as they sized up the line of girls like cattle at market. Hannah Reed kept her eyes fixed on her worn boots, letting her dark hair fall forward to shield her face. Coal dust still clung to her broad shoulders and plain cotton dress, despite her best efforts to scrub it away. Around her, the other workhouse girls stood straighter, prettier, and more delicate, everything she wasn't. "Next up," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the square. "Mary Beth Collins, 17 years old, good, with children and needlework." The bidding started quickly, and within minutes, Mary Beth was claimed by the banker's wife. One by one, the girls were called forward and bid upon. Some went to shopkeepers needing help, others to ranchers' wives wanting kitchen girls. With each successful sale, Hannah's heart sank lower. She knew what was coming. When she was the only one left, the auctioneer's enthusiasm had drained away entirely. "Last one, Purian," he drawled. "Hannah Reed, 19 years old. Strong back, used to heavy work." He paused as titters rippled through the crowd. Starting bid at $1. The silence that followed was worse than any mockery. Someone coughed. A few women whispered behind their hands, stealing glances at Hannah's broad frame and work-roughened hands. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably. "Come now, folks. Surely someone needs a strong pair of hands." 75 cents, he offered when no one spoke. More snickers. Hannah's cheeks burned, but she'd learned long ago not to cry where others could see. The workhouse had taught her that lesson well enough. 50 cents. The auctioneer was growing desperate now. 25, I'll take her. The deep voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. The crowd parted, turning to stare at the massive figure who'd spoken from the back. Hannah looked up despite herself, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was the biggest man she'd ever seen. A thick beard covered most of his face, and his buckskin jacket stretched across shoulders that seemed wide as a doorway. A scar ran through his right eyebrow, disappearing into his hairline. His eyes, sharp and clear beneath the brim of his hat, met hers for just a moment before returning to the auctioneer. "I said I'll take her." The giant man stepped forward, boots raising small clouds of dust. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar, letting it flash in the sunlight before tossing it to the auctioneer. That enough, the auctioneer caught the coin reflexively, his mouth hanging open. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, that's fine." The crowd had gone completely silent. Hannah could feel their stares burning into her as the big man Blackwood strode forward. Without ceremony, he lifted her small travel sack, nodding toward his wagon. "Let's go," he said simply. Hannah climbed onto the wagon seat, acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. "Poor thing, Mountain's gonna eat her alive." Crazy Jackson Blackwood. Always was strange after the war. What's he want with a girl like that anyway? Jackson Blackwood didn't seem to hear any of it. He flicked the reins and the wagon rattled out of Silverton, leaving the town's dust and whispers behind. They traveled in silence as the sun wheeled across the sky, the road growing rougher as they climbed into the mountains. Hannah held tight to the wagon side, stealing glances at her new master's broad back. He never turned around, never spoke a word. As they crested a ridge, the wagon slowed. Below them, a beautiful valley spread out, cradled by towering peaks, still capped with spring snow. A clear stream wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers. On a gentle slope, backed by pine forests, stood a cabin larger than Hannah had expected, built of solid logs with a neat stone chimney. A small barn stood to one side, and she could hear chickens settling in for the night. "Mercy Mountain," Blackwood said, the first words he'd spoken since leaving town. "My home." He guided the horses down the slope, coming to a stop before the cabin door. Only then did he turn to look at her fully. "You afraid of me, girl?" Hannah swallowed hard. "No, sir." It wasn't entirely a lie. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his fearsome reputation, a sadness perhaps. He studied her for a moment, then nodded as if satisfied. "Good. Fear's no basis for anything worthwhile." Blackwood helped her down from the wagon, his huge hands surprisingly gentle. He led her to the cabin door, then stepped aside to let her enter first. The interior was clean and well kept, with a stone fireplace and solid furniture. A pot of something savory bubbled over the flames. A shelf lined with books stood against one wall, not what she'd expected from a mountain hermit. "Your room's through there," he said, pointing to a door off the main room. "Got it ready this morning." Hannah stepped tentatively toward the door and peered inside. A real bed with a quilt, a small window with actual glass, even a rag rug on the floor. She turned back to him, confusion written plain on her face. "Rest now," was all he said, ladling some stew into a bowl and setting it on the table. "Been a long day." With that, he stepped outside, leaving Hannah alone in the warmth of the cabin, staring at the first real meal and real bed she'd seen in years. Through the window, she could see his massive silhouette moving toward the barn, outlined against the deepening mountain twilight. The mountain mist crept through the pines as dawn broke over Mercy Mountain. Hannah woke with a start, momentarily confused by the soft bed and warm quilt. Years of workhouse routine had trained her body to rise before the sun, ready for orders and labor. She dressed quickly in her faded work dress, smoothing it as best she could. Through the small window, she could see Jackson Blackwood's broad form, already at work, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm against the morning quiet. Split logs formed neat stacks beside the chopping block. Hannah stood uncertainly in the cabin's main room. No orders had been given, no tasks assigned. The silence felt strange after years of bark commands and strict schedules. The hearth needed sweeping, so she found a broom and set to work, stealing glances out the window at her new master. But Blackwood never came in to inspect her work or give direction. When she ventured outside to gather eggs from the chicken coop, he merely nodded from where he worked, then returned to his task. The next day followed the same pattern. Hannah found herself watching him, trying to anticipate needs that weren't voiced. When she saw him carrying water from the outdoor pump, she grabbed a bucket to help. Without a word, he showed her how to prime the handle just right to get the best flow. His huge hands moved with surprising gentleness as he demonstrated the motion. On the third day, she discovered tools in the lean-to shed, a hoe for the kitchen garden, shears for the sheep that grazed in the upper meadow. Again, Blackwood offered quiet guidance when she picked something up, showing her the proper grip or technique, but never demanding she use them. The cabin itself surprised her with its orderliness. Besides her room and Blackwood's, there was a root cellar dug beneath the floorboard shelves, stocked with preserved foods and dry goods. Everything had its place, from the cooking pots to the stack of split kindling by the hearth. It wasn't the crude bachelor shelter she'd expected, but a real home, carefully maintained. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Hannah ladled out 2 bowls of rabbit stew. They ate in their usual silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the pop of logs in the fireplace. But questions had been building in her mind for days, pressing against the quiet. until she couldn't hold them back any longer. "Why me?" The words came out barely above a whisper, but they seemed to fill the room. Blackwood set down his spoon, his deep-set eyes meeting hers across the table. "Because you look done with cruelty." 5 simple words spoken plainly, but they struck something deep inside her that she'd thought long buried. Tears welled up in her eyes for the first time in years, and she quickly ducked her head, letting her hair fall forward to hide her face. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. The man's words kept circling in her mind. Done with cruelty. How had he seen that in her? How had he known? A sound from outside drew her attention. Footsteps on the porch, then the creak of the door opening and closing. Hannah slipped from her bed and moved quietly to her bedroom door, opening it just enough to peer into the main room. Blackwood was strapping a small pack to his back and tucking his long knife into his belt. He moved with a silent precision that spoke of long practice, checking the load in a pistol before sliding it into a holster beneath his jacket. Whatever Aaron called him out in the dead of night, it wasn't casual. She watched him leave, then waited a full 10 minutes before curiosity got the better of her. Hannah wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. A nearly full moon illuminated the valley, casting everything in silver light. She could just make out Blackwood's tall figure moving purposefully along a trail that led into the forest to the west, away from town, toward the mountains that marked the border of Navajo territory. Hannah hesitated only a moment before following at a distance. Whatever secrets this mountain man kept, they might determine whether she'd found sanctuary or something more dangerous. She tracked him for almost an hour, keeping to the shadows and moving as quietly as her size would allow. The trail climbed steadily, winding through dense pines until it opened onto a small clearing. At the far side, a rock outcropping formed a shallow cave. Blackwood approached the cave entrance, set down his pack, and whistled softly, a sound like a night bird. After a moment, a small light appeared in the cave, a lantern being uncovered. A woman emerged from the shadows. She wore traditional Navajo clothing, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Despite the cool night, she wore only a light blanket over her shoulders. "Jackson," she said quietly, "you brought medicine." Blackwood nodded, opening his pack. "Quinine for the fever, bandages, dried meat." The soldiers, still patrolling the pass but less frequently. Another week, maybe 2, and the way should be clear. The woman accepted the supplies, placing them carefully inside the cave. And the boy, Blackwood's shoulders tensed. "No word, but I have people looking. He is alive. I feel it." The woman touched her heart. "My sister would know if he wasn't. I'll keep searching, Sarah. I promise, I bow." The woman, Sarah, placed a hand on Blackwood's arm. "Thomas would be proud of what you're doing, Jackson." His head dropped. "Thomas would be alive if not for me. The past is a shadow. We cannot change its shape, only decide whether to stand in its darkness or step into the light." Hannah leaned forward, straining to hear more, when a twig snapped beneath her foot. The sound, though small, carried in the night stillness. In an instant, Blackwood spun around, knife in hand. "Who's there?" Hannah froze, knowing she was caught. Slowly, she stepped into the moonlight, hands raised. "It's just me." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "You followed me, goddammit, girl. You have any idea how dangerous that was?" The Navajo woman moved forward, studying Hannah with piercing eyes. "She is the one from the workhouse, the one you bought." "Yes," Blackwood said tersely. Sarah circled Hannah, her gaze taking in everything. "She has kind eyes, strong hands." She stopped in front of Hannah. "Why did you follow him?" Hannah looked between the two of them, deciding honesty was her only option. "I heard him leave. I wanted to know if I was safe with him." "And what do you think now?" Sarah asked. "I think he's helping refugees," Hannah said quietly. "I think he could be hanged for it." Blackwood's jaw tightened, but Sarah smiled. "Smart girl, but not refugees. We are going home, back to our lands where we belong." She turned to Blackwood. "I must go. The others will worry." After she disappeared back into the cave, Blackwood grabbed Hannah's arm, not roughly but firmly. "Let's go. We'll talk at the cabin." The walk back was tense, neither speaking until they reached the safety of the cabin walls. Once inside, Blackwood built up the fire more out of habit than need on the mild spring night. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was grave. "What you saw tonight could get people killed. Not just me." Hannah met his gaze steadily. I won't tell anyone. How do I know that? Because I know what it's like to need help that doesn't come. Hannah's voice was quiet but firm. I was 7 when my mother died in childbirth. My father took to drink afterward, then disappeared altogether. The workhouse it was hell. Supervisor Simmons, she faltered, then straightened her shoulders. I won't betray someone trying to help others escape hell. Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then sighed heavily, dropping into his chair. Sarah Manyhorse and her people were forcibly relocated 3 years ago. Their land was needed for the railroad. Some of them have been trying to return to their ancestral homes. And you're helping them, he nodded. It's complicated. Because you knew someone named Thomas. A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. You heard that. It wasn't a question. Who was he? Hannah asked softly. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a folded paper sealed with a feather. Thomas Two Rivers was a Navajo scout who served with me during the war. He was, Blackwood paused. He was a better man than I ever was, and I betrayed him. Hannah sat in the chair opposite, waiting. I've never opened this, Blackwood said, holding up the letter. He gave it to me the last time I saw him. Said if anything happened to him, I was to deliver it to his sister. He tucked the letter away. Some truths take time to face. Is that why you live out here alone? A grim smile touched his lips. That and I don't much care for most people. Present company accepted. Hannah blinked, surprised by the hint of warmth in his voice. You should get some sleep, he said, rising to his feet. Daylight comes early. But as she turned to go, he added, Hannah. She paused. Thank you for understanding. Something in his tone, vulnerability from this mountain of a man, touched her heart in a way few things ever had. The seasons wheel faster in the mountains. Spring gave way to early summer, and Hannah found herself settling into life on Mercy Mountain with surprising ease. Jackson Blackwood, Jackson, as she'd begun to think of him, proved to be a patient teacher. Under his guidance, she learned to split wood with a maul to tend the garden so it yielded the sweetest vegetables, to set snares for rabbits, and even to shoot his old Sharps rifle. Her body, always strong from years of labor, grew leaner and more capable. Her skin bronzed in the summer sun as she worked alongside Jackson in the high meadow, helping to mend fences and care for the small herd of sheep he kept. At night, she would fall into exhausted, dreamless sleep, waking refreshed in a way she'd never known at the workhouse. They still spoke little, but the silences between them had grown comfortable, no longer strained with unasked questions. There was a rhythm to their days, a peaceful pattern that Hannah found herself cherishing. But the wider world would not stay at bay forever. One afternoon in late June, an unfamiliar wagon appeared on the trail leading up to the cabin. Jackson stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, until he recognized the driver. Peterson, he called. What brings you up the mountain? The old trader pulled his team to a halt before the cabin. He was a wiry man with a white beard and skin tanned to leather by years on the trail. Supplies and news, Blackwood, neither of which you'll like much. Hannah watched from the doorway as Peterson climbed down from his seat, moving with the careful deliberation of age. He tipped his hat to her. Miss Reed, good to see you looking well. Town was taking bets on whether you'd survive a month up here with the mountain man. Mr. Peterson, she acknowledged with a small smile. Jackson frowned. What news? There's a man in town, Eastern suit, fancy talk. Name's Harrington, Victor Harrington. Says he represents the Western Union Railroad. Peterson scratched his beard. Been asking questions about you, Blackwood, and about certain folk passing through these parts. Jackson's expression didn't change, but Hannah saw his hand tighten on the rifle barrel. What kind of questions? About your time as the scout, about your associations with certain tribes. Peterson glanced meaningfully toward the western ridge. And he's offering money for information about a half Navajo child around 2 years old might have been seen in these parts. Hannah's breath caught. The boy Sarah had mentioned. Come inside, Jackson said tersely. Both of you. Once they were seated at the table, Peterson continued. There's more. Harrington's got some kind of government authority, talking about national security and Indian spies. Sheriff Morris is eating it up like honey. Morris never did have much between his ears, Jackson muttered. He set up an office in the hotel, Got maps of all the surrounding properties spread out. Real interested in this area in particular. Peterson tapped a gnarled finger on the table. Railroads looking to expand the western line. Through Navajo territory, Jackson said. Peterson nodded. Through anywhere they damn well please, seems like. Hannah watched Jackson's face, seeing the calculations happening behind his eyes. How long's he planning to stay? Hard to say, but he's made himself comfortable. Brought in cases of fancy whiskey cigars from back east. Been making friends with all the important men in town. Peterson leaned forward, and he's got a personal stake in this. His son was killed in a raid 3 years back. Harrington's carrying a grudge big as a mountain. Jackson's jaw tightened. I appreciate the warning, old man. There's one more thing. Peterson reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in oilskin. Sarah Many Horses asked me to bring this to you, said it was urgent. Jackson took the package, his expression grave. After Peterson left, promising to return in a week with more information, Jackson unwrapped the oilskin on the table. Inside was a small carved wooden horse and a scrap of paper with a single line written in a careful hand. They found him. Blackwell Workhouse. He is alive. Hannah gasped. The boy Sarah was asking about. Jackson nodded, his face grim. Thomas Two Rivers' son, born just before. He stopped, pain flashing across his features. He disappeared during a raid 3 years ago. Sarah's sister Elena, the boy's mother, has been searching for him ever since. And he's at Blackwell? Hannah's heart began to race. With Simmons. You know something. It wasn't a question. Hannah swallowed hard. About a month before the auction, Simmons brought a child to the workhouse. A little boy, maybe 2 years old. Copper skin, black hair. The memory rose clear in her mind. He was beautiful but so frightened. Wouldn't let anyone touch him but me. Where was he kept? Simmons has a private study. He kept the child there locked up. Hannah's fist clenched. He said the boy was a scientific curiosity that could be worth money to the right people. Disgust colored her voice. I would sneak in at night to check on him, bring him extra food. I named him Charlie because he needed a real name, not just the specimen like Simmons called him. Jackson stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cabin like a caged bear. Blackwell's at least a day's ride from here, heavily guarded. Getting the boy out won't be easy. I know a way, Hannah said quietly. There's a delivery entrance at the back near the kitchens. It's only guarded during the day. At night, with the right timing between guard patrols. She took a deep breath. I could do it. I know the layout, the routines. Jackson stopped pacing, turning to look at her with surprise. You're offering to help. That boy deserves better than to be Simmons's prisoner. And if his mother has been searching for him all this time. Hannah met Jackson's gaze steadily. Yes, I'm offering to help. Something shifted in Jackson's eyes, a new respect perhaps. He nodded slowly. We'll need a plan and supplies. When do we leave? Tomorrow at first light. Jackson reached for his coat. I need to get word to Sarah. If Harrington's in town looking for the boy, time is not on our side. As he headed for the door, Hannah called after him. Jackson. He paused. Thank you for trusting me with this. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Trust is earned. You just earned it. The moon had yet to rise when they reached the outskirts of Blackwell. Jackson had left the wagon hidden in a stand of trees a mile back, continuing on foot to avoid detection. They crouched now on a ridge overlooking the workhouse, a grim 3-story stone building surrounded by a high wall. Light glowed in only a few windows. Most of the inmates would be asleep by now. There, Hannah whispered, pointing to a small gate at the rear of the compound. That's the delivery entrance. The guard makes rounds every half hour. We need to time it perfectly. Jackson nodded, his face half hidden in shadow. He was dressed entirely in dark clothing, his beard tied back to prevent it catching on anything. The long knife at his belt gleamed dully in the starlight. Once we're inside, we go straight to Simmons's study on the second floor east wing, Hannah continued. The boy Charlie should be there, then back the same way as quickly and quietly as possible. And if something goes wrong, Hannah's hand went to the small pistol Jackson had given her, tucked into the pocket of her dark dress. Then we improvise. They watched the guard make his rounds, timing his movements. When he disappeared around the far corner of the building, Jackson touched Hannah's shoulder. Now. They moved silently across the open ground, keeping low. The delivery gate was locked, but Jackson made short work of it with a set of picks he produced from his pocket, a skill Hannah hadn't known he possessed. Inside the wall, they pressed against the stone building, listening for any sound of alarm. When none came, Hannah led the way to a small door that opened into the kitchen area. The workhouse at night was a maze of shadows and creaking floorboards. Hannah navigated by memory, guiding them past the dormitories where she'd spent so many miserable years. Each step deeper into the building made her heart race faster, old fears rising like bile in her throat. But the thought of the little boy kept her moving forward. They reached the second floor without incident. Simmons's study was at the end of a long corridor, its door distinctive with polished brass fittings, luxury amid the general squalor. "Wait," Jackson whispered, his hand on her arm. "Listen." Voices drifted from behind the closed door, Simmons and someone else. "Considerable sum for the right specimen," an unfamiliar voice was saying. "My employers at the Bureau of Ethnology are particularly interested in mixed blood subjects." "As I explained in my letter, this one is unique," Simmons replied, his oily tone all too familiar to Hannah. "The father was a scout, educated at the government school. The mother is pure Navajo, a perfect case study of inheritance traits. And you're certain of the parentage?" "The mother's sister confirmed it before she escaped. We've kept detailed records of the subject's development." Jackson's face had gone hard as stone. Hannah could feel tension radiating from him like heat. "We need a distraction," she whispered. Before Jackson could respond, a bell began to toll somewhere in the building, the fire alarm. Shouts of confusion echoed through the corridors as doors opened and feet pounded on the wooden floors. "What the devil?" Simmons' voice rose in alarm. The study door flew open and he rushed out, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit. Neither spared a glance for the shadowy alcove where Hannah and Jackson had concealed themselves. As soon as they were gone, Hannah darted for the open door. Inside, the study was cluttered with books and papers, specimen jars lining the shelves. And there, in a makeshift pen in the corner, was Charlie. The little boy was asleep on a thin pallet curled into a tight ball, as if to protect himself even in slumber. He was thin, too thin, but otherwise appeared unharmed. "Charlie," Hannah whispered, kneeling beside him. "Charlie, wake up. It's me, Hannah." The child's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Hannah!" he cried, throwing his arms around her neck. "Shh, we have to be quiet." She gathered him up, wrapping him in the blanket from his pallet. "This is Jackson. He's going to help us get out of here." Charlie regarded the big man solemnly, then reached out a small hand. To Hannah's surprise, Jackson knelt down, letting the boy touch his beard. "Like Thomas," Charlie said softly. Jackson's eyes widened. "You remember your father?" The boy nodded. "Papa tall, beard." "We need to move," Hannah said urgently. "The distraction won't last long." Jackson swept Charlie into his arms, and they slipped back into the corridor. The workhouse was in chaos, people rushing toward the source of the alarm. They moved against the flow, keeping to the shadows, making their way back to the kitchen entrance. They were nearly there when a shout came from behind them. "Stop thee!" Simmons stood at the far end of the corridor, pointing directly at them. Beside him, the man in the expensive suit, Harrington it had to be, drew a pistol and "Run!" Oh, Jackson pushed Hannah ahead of him, shielding her and Charlie with his body as a shot rang out, splintering the doorframe beside them. They burst through the kitchen door and into the yard, abandoning stealth for speed. The guard at the delivery gate had abandoned his post to investigate the alarm, leaving their escape route clear. But more shouts were coming from behind, and the heavy tread of boots. They cleared the gate just as another shot cracked through the night, this one closer. Jackson grunted, but didn't slow. "Are you hit?" Hannah gasped as they ran toward the tree line. "Keep moving," was his only response. The darkness of the forest swallowed them, but their pursuers weren't giving up. Lanterns bobbed through the trees, and the baying of hounds filled the night. "They've released the dog," Hannah said, fear making her voice shake. Charlie buried his face against her neck, his small body trembling. Jackson's face was grim in the darkness. "We need to split up. I'll lead them away, buy you time to reach the wagon." "No, you're wounded." "It's just a graze. I've had worse shaving." Despite his words, Hannah could see a dark stain spreading on his left sleeve. "The boy is what matters. Get him to Sarah Many Horses. She'll know how to find his mother." "I'm not leaving you behind." Jackson grabbed her shoulder, his expression fierce. "This isn't about me or you. It's about the boy. His mother has been searching for 3 years. I made a promise to Thomas and I intend to keep it. Now go." Before she could argue further, he melted into the forest, moving with surprising stealth for such a large man. Within moments, shouts indicated the pursuers had spotted him. Hannah hesitated only a second before turning in the opposite direction, holding Charlie close, as she picked her way through the underbrush toward where they'd left the wagon. But Blackwell's men were smarter than Jackson had given them credit for. They'd split their forces, and now Lantern Light appeared ahead of Hannah, cutting off her route to the wagon. She changed direction, moving deeper into the unfamiliar forest. The terrain grew steeper, more treacherous. Loose stones skittered under her feet, threatening to send her tumbling. Charlie clung to her like a burr, mercifully silent despite his fear. The pursuit behind her grew closer. The dogs had her scent now. Hannah pushed herself harder, lungs burning, legs aching, but she was running out of options. The ground ahead fell away sharply, a ravine too steep to descend safely, especially carrying a child. And that was when the mountain giant stepped from the shadows, offering his hand as snow began to fall around them. "We don't have much time," Jackson said, leading Hannah away from the ravine. "The storm will slow them down, but not for long." "You're bleeding," Hannah said, noticing how he favored his left side. Later, he dismissed. "This way." He led them through a dense thicket that concealed a narrow game trail barely visible in the growing darkness. The snow was falling faster now, fat flakes swirling in the wind that had picked up with the storm's arrival. Charlie had fallen silent, watching everything with wide, solemn eyes. He showed no fear of Jackson, even reaching out occasionally to touch the big man's beard with curious fingers. After what seemed like hours, the trail opened onto a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. A crude lean-to had been constructed against a rock face just large enough to provide shelter from the worst of the weather. "We'll rest here," Jackson said. "The storm will cover our tracks." Inside the lean-to, he quickly built a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on the rock wall. Only then did he allow Hannah to examine his wound. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving an ugly furrow that still seeped blood. Hannah cleaned it as best she could with snow and strips torn from her petticoat, then bound it tightly. Jackson accepted her ministrations without complaint, his face betraying no pain. Charlie watched the process with interest, then crawled into Hannah's lap. When she was finished, his small body warm against the chill night air. Within minutes, he was asleep, exhausted by the night's events. "You were right about him," Jackson said softly, watching the boy. "He is beautiful." Hannah stroked Charlie's dark hair. "He's so small for all he's been through." "Children are resilient." Jackson's eyes grew distant. "More than we give them credit for." "Who set off the alarm? It couldn't have been coincidence." A rare smile touched Jackson's lips. "Sarah Many Horses has more friends than Harrington knows. When Peterson carried my message to her, she sent word to the cook at Blackwell, a woman whose son she once healed." Hannah shook her head in wonder. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since we learned where the boy was." Jackson added a small branch to the fire. "I never expected to involve you." "But you did." "Yes." He met her gaze across the flames, "and I'm grateful." They fell silent, listening to the wind howl through the pines. Charlie slept peacefully, one hand curled around a lock of Hannah's hair. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what morning would bring, Hannah felt a strange contentment. Here in this wild place, with this wounded giant of a man and a child who trusted her completely, she had found something she'd never expected to find. "Why did you really buy me that day?" she asked softly. Jackson didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. "I saw myself in you. The resignation, the expectation of cruelty." He looked away. "And I saw someone worth saving." "Is that what you're doing, saving me?" His eyes returned to hers, firelight reflecting in their depths. "I think we might be saving each other." The storm raged through the night, but within the lean-to, warmed by the small fire and each other's presence, Hannah Jackson and little Charlie slept the deep sleep of the exhausted but free. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through clouds and the realization that they weren't yet safe. Jackson's wound had stiffened overnight, limiting the use of his left arm, but he refused to acknowledge it as they broke camp. "We need to reach Mercy Mountain by nightfall," he said, studying the sky. "The storm's bought us time, but Harrington won't give up easily." "Will we be safe there?" Jackson's expression was grim. "Nowhere's truly safe now, but I have friends watching the trails." They traveled all day, avoiding the main paths, moving steadily higher into the mountains. Charlie rode on Jackson's shoulders, delighted with his lofty perch. Despite everything, the boy seemed to be thriving in the fresh air and freedom, pointing excitedly at birds and squirrels chattering in a mix of English and Navajo that made Jackson smile. As dusk approached, they crested the final ridge that overlooked Jackson's cabin. The valley below lay peaceful in the gathering shadows, smoke rising from the chimney. "Someone's there," Hannah said, alarmed. "It's all right," Jackson assured her. "I was expecting company." They descended carefully, alert for any sign of pursuit. As they neared the cabin, the door opened, and Sarah Many Horses stepped onto the porch, accompanied by another woman. She was younger than Sarah, with the same proud bearing, but softer features. Her traditional dress was adorned with intricate beadwork, and her long black hair hung in a single braid down her back. When she saw them approaching, her hand flew to her mouth. Charlie, still perched on Jackson's shoulders, went suddenly still. Then, with a cry that seemed torn from his very soul, he reached toward the woman. "Shima, Shima, mother, mother." Jackson lowered him carefully to the ground, and Charlie ran, his small legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. The woman dropped to her knees, arms outstretched, sobbing as she gathered her son to her breast. "My boy, my beautiful boy." Hannah felt tears spill down her cheeks at the reunion. Even Jackson's stoic expression had softened, though a shadow of old pain lingered in his eyes. Sarah approached them, clasping Hannah's hands in her own. "You have done a great thing," she said. "Elena has searched for 3 winters." "How did you find her?" Hannah asked. "She never stopped looking," Sarah replied simply. "When your message came, she was already on her way to us." Elena rose to her feet, Charlie clutched tightly in her arms. She approached Jackson slowly, her dark eyes holding his. "Jackson Blackwood," she said, her voice rich and melodic, despite the trace of an accent. "My brother spoke of you often." Jackson's face was a mask of carefully controlled emotion. "Thomas was a good man, better than I deserved as a friend. He thought highly of you, even at the end." Jackson flinched as if struck, but Elena continued, shifting Charlie to her hip so she could place a hand on Jackson's arm. "Sarah has told me what you have done, how you help our people return home, how you risked everything to find my son." Her fingers tightened briefly. Thomas would be proud. Something broke in Jackson's expression, a crack in the armor he'd worn for so long. He bowed his head, unable to speak. Elena turned to Hannah. "And you? Sarah says you cared for my boy in that terrible place, that you named him and showed him kindness when others did not." "He's a special child," Hannah said softly. "I only did what anyone would do." Elena's smile was sad. "No, few would risk what you have risked. My son calls you by name in his dreams. He trusts you." She touched Hannah's cheek gently. "You have a good heart, Hannah Reed." Inside the cabin, they shared a simple meal. Charlie moved between his mother and Hannah, still getting used to the miracle of having his mother back, but unwilling to stray far from the woman who had cared for him in captivity. As night fell, Sarah brought news from town, passed through her network of allies. "Harrington is furious. He has offered $100 for information leading to the boy's recovery. He claims the child was stolen from a government research facility." Her expression was grim. "Sheriff Morris has deputized 12 men to search the mountains." "And Simmons," Hannah asked, "claims you conspired with Indian sympathizers to steal valuable property." Sarah replied, "He has sworn out a warrant for your arrest." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Property, as if a child could be owned." "What will you do?" Hannah asked Elena. "We must reach our people," she replied, "beyond the border in our ancestral lands. There the soldiers cannot easily follow." "The passes are still guarded," Sarah warned, "and with Harrington's men searching." "I know another way," Jackson said. "An old hunting trail. It's difficult, but passable. I can guide you." Elena studied him thoughtfully. "You would do this risk more for us." "I owe Thomas a debt I can never repay," Jackson said quietly. "Helping his family is the least I can do." "And what of Hannah?" Sarah asked. "She cannot return to town now." All eyes turned to Hannah, who felt a sudden uncertainty. She had left the workhouse behind without a backward glance. But what place did she have in this unfolding drama? Where did she belong now? As if sensing her thoughts, Charlie climbed into her lap, leaning his head against her chest with complete trust. His small hand reached up to touch her face, and he smiled a smile, so like his father's, though Hannah had never met the man. "Mama," he said clearly. Elena's eyes widened, but she didn't look angry. Instead, a look of understanding passed over her face. "He calls me Shima, mother in our language," she said softly. "And you are Mama." He has room in his heart for both. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes again. "I never meant to take your place." "You didn't," Elena assured her. "You kept it warm until I could return." Later, after Elena had taken Charlie to sleep in Hannah's room, Jackson and Hannah sat by the fire. Sarah had gone to keep watch on the trail, alert for any sign of pursuit. "You should go with them," Jackson said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You'd be safer beyond the border." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to be safe." His voice was gruff. "Harrington won't stop. He'll bring more men, maybe even soldiers. And if they connect you to helping Navajo fugitives cross the border—" "What about you?" Jackson's smile was grim. "I can take care of myself." "That's not what I asked." Hannah leaned forward. "What will you do after Elena and Charlie are safe?" He shrugged, wincing slightly at the pull on his wounded arm. "Keep doing what I've been doing, I suppose. Help where I can." "Alone." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. "It's better that way," he said finally. "I'm not fit company for decent folk." "Because of what happened with Thomas." Jackson's expression darkened. "You don't know what I did." "Then tell me." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then, like a dam breaking, the words came pouring out. "I was a captain in the Army by the Army, assigned to the Western Territories after the war. Thomas Two Rivers was one of my scouts, educated at the government school, fluent in English. Brilliant tracker." A hint of pride entered his voice. "We became friends as much as a white officer and a Navajo scout could be friends in those days." He stared into the fire, seeing ghosts. "In '82, we received reports of renegade Apaches using a Navajo village as a base for raids. My commanding officer, Colonel Reynolds, ordered me to attack the village." Jackson's hands clenched. "Thomas said the reports were false, that there were no Apaches, only families, women and children." "But you attacked anyway," Hannah said softly. Jackson nodded, his face etched with old pain. "I followed orders, led 30 men into that village at dawn. There were no warriors, no weapons cache, no sign of Apaches, just frightened people awakened from sleep." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We killed 14 before I called a halt. 8 of them children." Hannah felt sick, but she didn't look away. Thomas was there. He'd ridden ahead, tried to warn them. Jackson's eyes glistened in the firelight. "He never raised a hand against us even then. Just stood there looking at me with such disappointment, such betrayal. He left the Army that day, returned to his people. And that's why you help them now. Guilt. Guilt, penance, call it what you will." Jackson's voice was bitter. "It doesn't bring back the dead." "But it might save the living," Hannah said gently. "Charlie, Elena, others like them." Jackson looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing something new. "How can you not hate me knowing what I've done? Because I see what you're doing now." Hannah reached across the space between them, taking his large hand in both of hers. "The past is a shadow, remember. We decide whether to stand in its darkness or step into the light." A ghost of a smile touched his lips at her echo of Sarah's words. "You make it sound simple." "It's not, but it's necessary." Hannah's grip tightened. "And you don't have to do it alone." Something vulnerable flickered in Jackson's eyes, hope perhaps, or the fear of hope. Before he could respond, the cabin door burst open and Sarah rushed in. "Riders coming up the valley," she said breathlessly. "At least a dozen. Harrington's men, and they're armed for war." The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Jackson was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his rifle. "Wake Elena, get the horses ready." His voice had changed, become the voice of command. "We need to be gone before they reach the cabin." As Hannah hurried to obey, the sound of distant hoofbeats drifted through the night air. The hunt was on, and they were the quarry. The first part of their journey had ended. Now the real test would begin. Night cloaked the mountain as 5 figures slipped away from the cabin, moving like shadows through the pines. Jackson led the way, his rifle cradled in his good arm, every sense alert for danger. Behind him, Elena carried Charlie the boy mercifully asleep against her shoulder. Hannah and Sarah brought up the rear, leading 2 pack horses laden with supplies. They had abandoned most of their possessions, taking only what was essential for survival: food, blankets, weapons, medicine. Jackson's face had been grim as he locked the cabin door, knowing he might never return to the home he had built with his own hands. "We'll head for the high ridge," he whispered when they paused in a small clearing. "There's an old trapper's cabin near the pass. We can rest there before crossing into Navajo territory." The distant sound of hoofbeats carried on the night air, still in the valley, but moving steadily upward. Hannah glanced back, her heart constricting at the sight of lantern light weaving through the trees, far below Harrington's men closing in. "They're following our trail," Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. Jackson nodded. "We need to split up, create confusion." He turned to Elena. "You and Charlie go with Sarah. Take the western path, then double back north toward Black Bear Canyon. The crossing there is safe this time of year." "What about you?" Elena asked, shifting Charlie's weight on her hip. "Hannah and I will leave a more obvious trail heading east. Draw them away from you." Sarah frowned. "Your arm is fine," Jackson cut her off. "We'll rendezvous at Grey Wolf Springs in 3 days. If we're not there by sunset on the third day, don't wait. Get across the border." There was no time for lengthy goodbyes. Elena embraced Hannah quickly, her dark eyes conveying what words could not. "Take care of each other," she said softly, touching Hannah's cheek. "We will pray for your safe journey." Charlie stirred, blinking sleepily at the adults' solemn faces. His small hand reached out toward Hannah. "Mama, come." Hannah's throat tightened. "Soon, little one. You go with Shima now. Be a brave boy." The child seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He nodded solemnly, then tucked his head against his mother's neck once more. Sarah clasped Jackson's hand, then Hannah's. "Grey Wolf Springs, 3 days." Her gaze lingered on Jackson. "Thomas would be proud, brother." Then they were gone, melting into the darkness of the forest like spirits. Hannah felt the loss keenly, as if something vital had been torn away. But there was no time for sentiment. Jackson was already moving, leading their horses eastward at a deliberate pace, leaving clear signs of their passage. "Will they be safe?" Hannah asked when they had traveled some distance. "Sarah knows these mountains as well as I do," Jackson replied. "Better, maybe. And she has connections with her people we can only imagine." He paused, listening to the night sounds. "Our job now is to be very obvious and very interesting to Harrington's men." They rode through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. Jackson's wound was clearly paining him, though he refused to acknowledge it. Hannah could see the dark stains spreading on his bandage, but knew better than to mention it. Stubbornness was etched into every line of the man's face. Dawn broke cold and clear, revealing a landscape transformed by the previous night's snow. The pines stood like sentinels, their branches laden with white. In another circumstance, Hannah might have found it beautiful. Now she saw only the trail they had left behind, a clear path for their pursuers to follow. "Good," Jackson said when she pointed this out. "That's exactly what we want." By mid-morning, they had reached a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the valley below. Pausing to rest the horses, they watched as a line of riders appeared on their trail, at least 10 men led by a figure in a distinctive black coat. "Harrington," Jackson said grimly, "and it looks like Sheriff Morris with him. They have picked up our trail all right. How far to the trapper's cabin you mentioned?" "We won't make it before nightfall, not with them so close behind." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he studied the terrain. "We need to find a defensible position before dark." They pushed on, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, each breath a visible cloud in the cold. Hannah's limbs ached with fatigue, but she pressed forward, drawing strength from Jackson's unwavering determination. Late afternoon found them in a narrow canyon, sheer rock walls rising on either side. A small stream trickled through the center, partially frozen over. Jackson led them to where the canyon widened slightly, forming a natural alcove sheltered by overhanging rock. "We'll make our stand here," he said, dismounting with a barely suppressed groan of pain. "There's only one approach, and I can cover it from those boulders." Hannah slid from her horse legs, trembling with exhaustion. "You need to rest. Let me look at your wound." For once, Jackson didn't argue. He sank down on a fallen log, allowing Hannah to help him remove his coat. The bandage beneath was soaked through with blood, the wound angry and inflamed. "It needs cleaning," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her concern, "and fresh bandages." "Do what you can," Jackson replied, his voice tight, "but be quick about it. Our visitors will be arriving soon. Hannah worked efficiently using snow to clean the wound before applying a poultice of herbs Sarah had packed for them. Jackson endured her ministrations in stoic silence, but she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the first sign of fever. "You should have said something sooner," she chided gently as she wrapped a fresh bandage around his arm. "Wouldn't have changed anything." His eyes met hers, a flicker of something vulnerable passing through them. "Besides, I've had worse." "That doesn't make it better." Hannah secured the bandage, her fingers lingering for a moment on his arm. "We're in this together. Remember, that means you tell me when you're hurting." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am." The moment of connection was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats echoing through the canyon. Jackson was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. "Get the horses behind those rocks," he instructed. "Then find cover yourself. No matter what happens, don't show yourself unless I signal." "I'm not hiding while you face them alone," Hannah protested. "This isn't a debate." Jackson's voice was steel. "Harrington wants the boy. He doesn't know you're with me. If things go badly, you might still get away, reach Sarah and Elena. And leave you to die. I won't do it." Jackson grasped her shoulder, his large hand gentle despite his urgency. "Hannah, listen to me. Charlie needs you. Elena needs you. If I can buy you time to reach them, that's what matters." His eyes softened. "Please, let me do this one thing right." The hoofbeats were growing louder. Hannah could hear men's voices now echoing off the canyon walls. Time was running out. "Promise me you won't do anything foolish," she said fiercely. "Promise me you'll stay alive." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, regret perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't express. "I promise to try." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one he could give. With a heavy heart, Hannah led the horses to shelter, then took up position behind a large boulder, the small pistol cold in her hand. Jackson moved to the entrance of the alcove, positioning himself behind a natural barricade of fallen rock. From there, he had a clear view of the canyon's approach, while remaining partially concealed. The riders appeared around the bend in the canyon, moving cautiously now. At their head rode Victor Harrington, distinguishable by his fine black coat and the silver handle of his pistol gleaming at his hip. Beside him, Sheriff Morris looked uncomfortable in the saddle, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. Behind them came 8 more men, a rough-looking bunch armed with rifles and shotguns. Hannah recognized one as Simmons from the workhouse, his thin face pinched with malice. Jackson raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The riders halted abruptly, hands going to weapons. Harrington squinted toward the rocks, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Blackwood," Sheriff Morris called. "That you?" "It's me, Morris. You're trespassing on my land." Harrington urged his horse forward a few steps. He was a handsome man in his 50s, with silver at his temples and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. But there was something cold in his eyes, something that made Hannah shiver despite the distance. "Mr. Blackwood," he called, his voice cultured and smooth. "I'm Victor Harrington, representing the Western Union Railroad. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I don't recall stealing any railroads lately," Jackson replied evenly. A few of the men chuckled, but Harrington's expression remained stone. "The Indian child, Mr. Blackwood, the boy you abducted from a government facility." "Funny definition of government facility you've got, and funnier still that you think a child can be property." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The child is evidence in an ongoing investigation into Indian raids on railroad construction. His mother is wanted for questioning. Sounds to me like you've lost them both." "But not for long," Harrington gestured casually. "We've been tracking you since your cabin. It's only a matter of time before we find the woman and the boy. Why not make this easier on yourself? Tell us where they are, and perhaps we can come to an arrangement regarding your legal difficulties." Jackson's laugh was bitter. "What difficulties would those be?" Sheriff Morris cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Jackson, you're wanted for assaulting my deputies, aiding the escape of Indian fugitives, and stealing property from the Blackwell workhouse. If by property you mean a terrified child locked in a cage, then yes, I took him." Jackson's voice hardened. "And I'd do it again." Harrington's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Enough of this. Where is the boy?" "Safe from you. That's all you need to know." "I don't think you understand your situation, Mr. Blackwood." Harrington's hand rested on his pistol. You're wounded, outnumbered, and out of options. The boy's mother can't have gone far. We'll find her with or without your help. You seem mighty interested in one little boy, Jackson observed. What's he to you, Harrington? A shadow crossed Harrington's face. That's not your concern. Isn't it because I'm thinking there's more to this than railroad business? Jackson shifted slightly, keeping his rifle trained on the group. I heard about your son, killed in a raid 3 years back. Is that what this is about, revenge? Harrington's expression darkened dangerously. You know nothing about my son. I know more than you think. I know the raid that killed him wasn't Navajo. It was Apache. I know the government buried that fact because it was more convenient to blame the Navajo who were being relocated for the railroad anyway. Jackson's voice was relentless. I know your boy died for nothing but greed, Harrington. Railroad greed. Your greed. Shut your mouth, Mo. Harrington's control snapped. My son was a lieutenant in the United States Cavalry. He died serving his country against savages. Savages like the ones you're protecting. He died because men like you decided land was worth more than lives, Jackson countered. How many more have to die for your railroad, Harrington? How many more children have to lose their parents? The silence that followed was electric. Even Harrington's men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain glances. Sheriff Morris looked positively ill. Finally, Harrington spoke, his voice deadly quiet. You have 1 minute to throw down your weapon and surrender Blackwood. After that, we come in shooting. Jackson didn't move. You come in shooting, some of you won't leave this canyon alive. Is that worth it for a child who's done nothing wrong? 50 seconds. From her hiding place, Hannah could see Jackson's shoulders tense. He was outnumbered 10-1, wounded and fevered. The odds were impossible. Morris, Jackson called. You're the law here. Are you really going to let Harrington murder me for rescuing a child from abuse? The sheriff fidgeted with his reins. Nobody's talking about murder, Jackson. Just come on out and we'll sort this properly back in town. Like you sorted those Navajo families last year, the ones who disappeared from your jail before their trial. Jackson's voice was cutting. We both know I won't make it to any trial. Harrington checked his pocket watch ostentatiously. 30 seconds. Blackwood. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let this happen. Couldn't watch Jackson die while she hid like a coward. Her fingers tightened on the pistol. 20 seconds. A plan, if you could call it that, formed in Hannah's mind. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was all she had. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the horses. 10 seconds. Your father would be ashamed of you, Harrington. Jackson called a new note in his voice that made Hannah pause. Senator Harrington sent the order, didn't he? The order to attack that village where Thomas Two Rivers' family lived. Your father gave the command that started all this. Harrington's face contorted with rage. Time's up. He drew his pistol. Take him. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The men raised their rifles. Jackson fired first, the shot echoing like thunder in the confined space. One of Harrington's men toppled from his saddle. Return fire peppered the rocks around Jackson's position. Hannah saw him duck, then rise to fire again. Another man fell, clutching his shoulder. Then, with a cry that startled even herself, Hannah slapped the rumps of both horses, sending them charging toward the gunman. The startled animals plowed into the group, scattering them in confusion. In the chaos, Hannah darted to Jackson's side, firing her small pistol at the nearest attacker. The bullet went wide, but the surprise was enough to make the man dive for cover. Damn it, woman, Jackson growled, pulling her down as bullets whined overhead. I told you to stay hidden. And let you have all the fun, Hannah retorted, reloading her pistol with shaking hands. Not likely. Despite the dire situation, Jackson's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. On my signal run for that crack in the rock wall, it leads to a path up the cliff. What about you? Right behind you. He raised his rifle. Ready now. Hannah sprinted for the narrow fissure in the canyon wall, bullets kicking up dirt at her heels. Behind her, Jackson fired 3 rapid shots, then followed. They squeezed through the opening just as Harrington's men regrouped, unleashing a volley that ricocheted off the rock face. The passage beyond was tight, barely wide enough for Jackson's broad shoulders. It twisted upward at a steep angle, forcing them to climb more than walk. Hannah's breath came in gasps, her muscles protesting after days of hard travel. But fear was a powerful motivator, and the sound of pursuit kept her moving. Jackson was struggling. The fever from his wound and blood loss had taken a toll. His breathing was labored, each movement clearly causing him pain. But he pressed on with grim determination, stopping only to fire down the passage when their pursuers drew too close. After what seemed an eternity, the passage widened, opening onto a narrow ledge high above the canyon floor. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. In other circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. There, Jackson pointed to where the ledge continued around a bend. That leads to a trail down the other side. We can lose them in the forest. But before they could move, a shot cracked from below. Jackson grunted, staggering against the rock wall. Fresh blood blossomed on his shirt just below his right shoulder. "Jackson!" Hannah cried, lunging to support him. "Keep going." He gasped, his face ashen. "Don't stop." Somehow she got his good arm over her shoulders, bearing as much of his weight as her smaller frame could manage. Together they stumbled along the ledge, each step a victory against pain and exhaustion. The trail down the far side was treacherous, especially in the fading light. Loose stones shifted under their feet, threatening to send them tumbling. Jackson was growing heavier against her, his movements less coordinated as blood loss and fever took their toll. "Just a little further," Hannah encouraged, though she had no idea where they were going. "Stay with me, Jackson." "Hannah," he murmured, his voice faint. "If I don't make it—" "Don't you dare," she interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare give up now." A grim smile touched his lips. "Bossy woman." The forest at the base of the cliff was thick with undergrowth, perfect for hiding, but difficult to navigate, especially with an injured man and failing light. Hannah pushed on, driven by desperation and a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. Behind them, shouts echoed from the clifftop. Harrington's men had reached the ledge, but darkness would make following their trail nearly impossible. A small mercy. When Jackson's legs finally gave out, Hannah knew they could go no further. They had reached a small hollow formed by the roots of a massive fallen tree, partially concealed by brush and shadows. It would have to do. She eased Jackson down, propping him against the tree trunk. In the dim light, his face was gray with pain, his breathing shallow. The new wound was bad, the bullet lodged somewhere in his chest. Without proper medical attention, Hannah pushed the thought away. She tore strips from her petticoat, using them to bind the wound as best she could. Jackson watched her through half-closed eyes. "You should go," he whispered. "Find Sarah and Elena. Get Charlie across the border." "I'm not leaving you," Hannah replied, her voice brooking no argument. "So save your breath." "Stubborn woman. Learn from the best." She finished the bandage, then gently brushed his hair back from his forehead. His skin burned with fever. "Rest now. We'll move in when it's light." Jackson's hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong, despite his weakness. "Thank you," he said softly, "for staying." Something in his tone and the vulnerable gratitude of those simple words broke through Hannah's carefully maintained composure. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Don't thank me yet," she managed, trying to smile through her tears. "You're not rid of me that easily." His fingers squeezed hers once before his eyes drifted shut, exhaustion finally claiming him. Hannah settled beside him, cradling his head in her lap, keeping watch through the long, cold night. Dawn broke gray and cheerless, a light snow beginning to fall. Hannah hadn't slept, her body stiff with cold and tension. Jackson had drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever rising steadily through the night. Each labored breath was a small victory, but she knew they were running out of time. They needed help, and soon. But where could they go? Harrington's men were surely still searching, and the nearest town was Silverton, where a warrant waited for her and certain death for Jackson. The answer came with the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow. Hannah tensed, reaching for the pistol she had set beside her, but instead of Harrington or his men, the figure that appeared through the falling snow was Sarah Many Horses. "I thought I might find you here," she said, kneeling beside them. Her sharp eyes took in Jackson's condition. "How long has he been like this?" "Since yesterday evening," Hannah replied, relief making her voice shake. "He was shot on the cliff. The bullet's still inside." Sarah examined the wound with practiced hands. "We need to get him somewhere warm, somewhere safe." She looked up. "Can you walk? It's not far." "I can walk," Hannah affirmed. "But Jackson, help is coming." Sarah rose, moving to the edge of their shelter to scan the forest. Ah, there. Two men appeared through the trees leading horses. They were Navajo, dressed in a mixture of traditional clothing and cast-off American garments. Both carried rifles and moved with the silent grace of experienced hunters. Sarah spoke to them rapidly in Navajo. The men nodded, then approached Jackson with respectful caution. "These are my cousins," Sarah explained to Hannah. "They will help carry Jackson to our camp." With gentle efficiency, the men fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, securing it between two horses. They lifted Jackson onto the makeshift stretcher, his large frame dwarfing even their considerable height. He stirred but didn't wake, lost in the grip of fever. Hannah was given a horse, though she was so exhausted she could barely stay in the saddle. Sarah led the way, moving deeper into the forest, away from the trails Harrington's men would likely search. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks almost as soon as they were made. The Navajo camp was well hidden in a sheltered valley, nestled against a cliff that blocked the worst of the wind. About a dozen hide-covered lodges formed a rough circle around a central fire. Women tended cooking pots or worked at various tasks, while children played in the snow, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the somber mood of the adults. Their arrival caused a stir. People emerged from the lodges, watching with curious eyes as Sarah led them to a large structure near the cliff face. Hannah recognized Elena standing in the doorway, Charlie peeking out from behind her skirts. When the boy saw Hannah, he broke free with a cry of delight. "Mama! Mama!" He ran to her, arms outstretched. Hannah slid from her horse, dropping to her knees to embrace him. Charlie's small body was warm and solid against her, a miracle in the midst of so much uncertainty. "Hello, little one," she whispered, breathing in his familiar scent. "I've missed you." Elena approached more slowly, her eyes on the travois where Jackson lay motionless. "What happened?" "Harrington's men," Hannah explained, rising with Charlie in her arms. "They cornered us in a canyon. Jackson was shot." Sarah was already directing her cousins to bring Jackson into the lodge. "We need hot water, clean bandages," she instructed Elena, "and my medicine bag." Inside, the lodge was warm and dim, lit by a small fire in a central pit. Furs and woven blankets covered the packed earth floor. The men laid Jackson on a pallet near the fire, then withdrew respectfully. Sarah knelt beside him, removing the blood-soaked bandages. The wound was angry and inflamed, the flesh around it hot to the touch. "The bullet must come out," she said grimly, "and soon." Elena took charge of Charlie, leading him to the far side of the lodge where he wouldn't witness what was to come. Hannah remained by Jackson's side, holding his hand, as Sarah prepared her instruments, a small, sharp knife and a pair of metal forceps that looked horrifyingly inadequate for the task ahead. "This will be painful for him," Sarah warned. "Even unconscious, he may fight. You must hold him still." Hannah nodded, positioning herself at Jackson's shoulders. Another woman, one of the elders, her face mapped with the lines of a long life, came to help, taking position at his legs. What followed was a nightmare of blood and pain. Jackson roared back to consciousness as Sarah's knife probed the wound, his body arching in agony. It took all of Hannah's strength to hold him down, whispering desperate words of comfort that she doubted he could hear. Sarah worked with steady hands, her face a mask of concentration as she searched for the bullet. When she finally extracted it, a small misshapen lump of lead, Jackson had lapsed back into unconsciousness, his face waxy and pale beneath his beard. "Will he live?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah didn't answer immediately, busy cleaning and packing the wound with a poultice of herbs. "The bullet missed his lung, which is fortunate, but he has lost much blood in the fever." She shook her head. "It is in the hands of the spirits now, and in his will to live." Once Jackson was bandaged and settled, Hannah allowed herself to be led to another part of the lodge where food and tea waited. She was numb with exhaustion and worry, moving like an automaton as Elena helped her remove her blood-stained outer garments and wrapped her in a warm blanket. Charlie crawled into her lap, sensing her distress. His small hands patted her cheeks with solemn concern. "Mama said," Hannah managed a smile for him, "and just tired, little one." "Where Jackson?" the boy asked, looking around the lodge. "Jackson is sleeping," Elena answered, stroking her son's hair. "He's very tired too." Charlie considered this, then announced, with a child's certainty, "I help make better." He wiggled free from Hannah's lap and toddled over to where Jackson lay unconscious. Before anyone could stop him, he patted Jackson's beard gently, just as he'd done when they first met. Sleep good, he instructed seriously. Get better. The simple gesture, so full of innocent faith, brought fresh tears to Hannah's eyes. Elena guided Charlie back to her, but not before the boy had placed his stuffed toy, a small cloth horse, beside Jackson's hand. He has a good heart, Elena said softly, like his father. Hannah looked at her in surprise. It was the first time Elena had spoken directly of Thomas. Sarah told me what Jackson said. Elena continued, sitting beside Hannah. About the village, about my brother. Hannah tensed, uncertain how to respond. I'm sorry, Tita. Elena's smile was sad. For what? You did not give the order. You did not fire the guns. Neither did Jackson, not really. He was following orders. Yes. Elena's gaze drifted to the unconscious man. Orders he has regretted every day since. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at Charlie. The guilt. The shame. She sighed. Oh, my brother would not have wanted that. You don't hate him? Hannah asked, genuinely surprised. For what happened to Thomas? Hate is a luxury we cannot afford. Elena replied simply. There has been too much death already. Too much pain. She looked at Hannah directly. And you care for him, yes. This matters to me more than old wounds. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. We haven't known each other long. Elena's smile was knowing. Time is not always the measure of such things. Before Hannah could respond, Sarah returned to the fire, her face grave. Riders approaching from the south. Many riders. Elena rose swiftly. Harrington. Perhaps, or soldiers. Sarah's expression was grim. We must prepare to move. Jackson can't be moved, Hannah protested. Not in his condition. If we stay, we all risk capture, Sarah pointed out. Or worse. A tense silence fell over the lodge. Outside, they could hear the camp stirring to action, voices calling, horses being readied. I will stay with him, Hannah said finally. The rest of you should go. Get Charlie safely across the border. Elena shook her head. We will not abandon you. It's not abandonment, it's survival, Hannah insisted. Charlie needs his mother. Your people need you. Jackson and I will follow when he's stronger. She met Elena's gaze steadily. Please, let me do this. Sarah and Elena exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Sarah nodded. There is a place, she said, a cave in the high rocks not far from here. Few know of it. You would be safe there until Jackson can travel. Show me, Hannah said, rising to her feet. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. While the rest of the camp prepared to move, Sarah led Hannah to the hidden cave, helping her establish a small shelter within its depths. A natural chimney in the rock would allow smoke to escape without being easily visible from below. There was even a small spring at the back of the cave, ensuring a supply of fresh water. When they returned to the lodge, Jackson had been carefully wrapped in furs, ready for transport. He remained unconscious. His breathing labored, but some of the deathly pallor had left his face. Moving him to the cave was a delicate operation requiring all of Sarah's cousins working together. The entrance was well concealed by a tumble of boulders, accessible only through a narrow passage that barely accommodated Jackson's broad shoulders. Inside, however, the space opened up considerably, with enough room to stand upright and move about comfortably. Once Jackson was settled on a pallet of furs near the small fire, Sarah gave Hannah final instructions for his care: when to change the poultice, what signs to watch for that might indicate worsening infection, how to prepare the medicinal tea she had left in abundance. We will leave signs for you, she promised, markers to guide you to us when he is strong enough to travel. And if he doesn't, Hannah couldn't finish the thought. Sarah gripped her shoulder firmly. He is strong, stronger than he knows, and he has something to live for now. Her gaze was penetrating. Someone to live for. With that enigmatic statement, she departed, leaving Hannah alone with her unconscious charge. Shortly after, she heard the distant sounds of the camp breaking up, of horses and people moving out. And then silence broken only by the soft pop of the fire and Jackson's labored breathing. Hannah settled beside him, adjusting the furs to keep him warm in the cave's cool air. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in white silence. They were truly alone now, cut off from the world in this stone womb high above the valley. Just you and me now, she murmured, gently wiping Jackson's fevered brow with a damp cloth. So you'd better not die on me, Jackson Blackwood. I haven't come this far to lose you now. Whether it was her imagination or some response to her voice, his breathing seemed to ease slightly. Taking that as encouragement, Hannah continued to talk, her voice soft in the cave's quiet. Charlie left his horse for you. He was very insistent about it. Says it will help you get better. She smiled at the memory. He's such a special child. So much light in him despite everything he's been through. As night fell outside, Hannah built up the fire, then curled up beside Jackson's pallet, keeping watch over his fitful sleep. The mountain silence wrapped around them like a blanket, isolating them from the dangers that had pursued them. For now, at least, they were safe. The fever broke sometime in the deep hours of the night. Hannah woke from a light doze to find Jackson's face cooler to the touch, his breathing more regular. Relief flooded through her with such force that she had to press a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever spirits might be listening. "Thank you for sparing him." Days passed in the quiet rhythm of survival. Hannah ventured out only when necessary to gather firewood or check the snares Sarah had set before leaving. Game was scarce in winter, but she managed to catch a few rabbits, supplementing the dried provisions they had been left. Jackson drifted in and out of consciousness, growing gradually more lucid with each waking period. The wound was healing clean thanks to Sarah's skilled care and Hannah's diligent attention to her instructions. On the fourth day, the Hannah returned from checking the snares to find Jackson fully awake and attempting to sit up. "What do you think you're doing?" she scolded, hurrying to his side. "Testing whether I'm still alive?" He replied, his voice weak but wry. "Jury's still out." Hannah eased him back down, adjusting the furs around him. "You nearly weren't. That bullet was lodged dangerously close to your lung." "Sarah got it out," Hannah nodded. "She saved your life. Again." Jackson's eyes roamed the cave, taking in their surroundings. "Where are we? Where's Charlie and Elena?" "Safe," Hannah assured him. "They've gone ahead with Sarah and the others, heading for the border. We'll join them when you're stronger." He seemed to relax at that, some tension leaving his frame. "Harrington." There were riders near the camp. Sarah thought it might be him or soldiers. That's why they moved on. Hannah poured a cup of medicinal tea, supporting Jackson's head as he drank. "We haven't seen any sign of pursuit since we've been here." Jackson grimaced at the bitter taste of the tea, but drank it dutifully. "How long have we been here?" 4 days. You've been mostly unconscious." He looked at her with new awareness, noticing perhaps for the first time the shadows under her eyes, the strain in her face. "You stayed with me all this time." "Where else would I go?" Hannah busied herself with the fire, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "Besides, you'd have done the same for me." "Yes," he said quietly, "I would have." The simple honesty in those words made her heart skip a beat. She kept her back to him, afraid of what her face might reveal. "You should rest," she said finally. "You need to regain your strength." "I've been resting for 4 days, apparently." But his voice was already growing weaker, his body's demands overriding his stubborn will. "Just for a little while, then." Hannah turned back to find his eyes already closing, his breathing deepening towards sleep. She allowed herself a moment simply to look at him, this complicated, haunted man who had changed her life so completely in such a short time. What would happen when he was fully recovered? Would they continue together to find Elena and Charlie? And then, what Hannah had no illusions about her place in this unfolding drama. She was an outsider, a temporary guardian for a child who had his true family back. Jackson had his own demons to wrestle, his own path to follow. Where did that leave her? The question circled in her mind as she settled into what had become her usual spot near the fire. Outside, snow continued to fall, isolating them further from the world and its demands. For now, at least, they existed in a strange limbo, suspended between what had been and whatever awaited them beyond the mountain's embrace. The days of Jackson's recovery established a new rhythm to their isolated existence. Each morning, Hannah would check his wounds, change the poultice, and help him drink the medicinal tea. At first, he could manage only a few minutes of consciousness before exhaustion claimed him again. But gradually, he began to stay awake longer, his natural strength reasserting itself. By the end of the first week, he was able to sit up without assistance, though the effort clearly cost him. Hannah found herself both impressed by his determination and exasperated by his stubborn refusal to acknowledge his limitations. "You're going to tear those stitches," she admonished as he attempted to stand one morning. "And then where will we be?" "Stuck in this cave even longer," Jackson retorted, but he allowed her to ease him back down. "I'm not used to being idle. You're not idle, you're healing. There's a difference, or Bamawaj. He grimaced. Doesn't feel different from where I'm sitting. Despite his frustration, there was a new ease between them. Forced proximity had broken down some of the barriers that had existed before, creating a tentative companionship built on shared danger and mutual dependence. In the quiet evenings as snow fell outside their stone shelter, they began to share stories. Hannah spoke of her childhood, her mother's death, her father's descent into alcoholism, the grim years at the workhouse. Jackson listened with quiet attention, offering neither pity nor judgment, only understanding. In turn, he told her of his own past, growing up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, joining the Union Army as a youth during the last year of the Civil War, his subsequent posting to the Western Territories. I thought I was doing something noble, he said one night, staring into the fire. Bringing civilization to the wilderness. That's what they told us. His laugh was bitter. Didn't take long to see it for what it really was, theft dressed up as progress. Is that why you became friends with Thomas? Hannah asked. Because you saw the truth. Jackson nodded slowly. Thomas was different. Educated at the government school, fluent in English, knowledgeable about both worlds. He didn't hate whites despite having every reason to. He believed cooperation was possible. A shadow crossed his face. He trusted me. And you betrayed that trust, Hannah said softly, not an accusation, but an acknowledgement. I followed orders, Jackson's voice was hollow. Like a good soldier, never questioning, never hesitating. His hands clenched into fists. 14 dead, 8 of them children. Hannah moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his in silent support. What happened after, with Thomas? Jackson's eyes remained fixed on the flames. He left the army that day, returned to his people. I didn't see him again until 2 years later, during the forced relocations. He was helping his people hide from the soldiers, using his knowledge of army procedures against us. A hint of pride crept into his voice. He was good at it too, ran circles around the regular troops. But not around you. I knew how he thought, knew where to look. Jackson's expression darkened. That's when it happened. The raid on the settlement where Elena and Charlie were living. Thomas was there trying to help them escape before the soldiers arrived. There was a firefight, chaos. Hannah waited, sensing there was more to the story. I saw him fall, Jackson continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Saw the bullet strike him. But when we searched afterward, his body was gone. Elena and several others had disappeared too. Charlie was presumed dead in the fighting. But he wasn't, Hannah said. He was taken to Blackwell. Jackson nodded. Simmons was there supposedly as an observer for some government bureau. Must have seen an opportunity for profit. On in Harrington, how about does he fit into all this? His son was leading the troops that day. Lieutenant Victor Harrington, Jr. Jackson's mouth twisted. Young, eager to prove himself. He's the one who gave the order to open fire against the explicit command to take prisoners when possible. He was killed in the fighting. Yes, one of the first casualties, shot by his own men in the confusion, though that's not the official story. Jackson looked at her directly. The official report blames Thomas for the lieutenant's death, claims he shot him at point-blank range. Hannah's eyes widened. Is that why Harrington is so obsessed with finding Charlie revenge for his son? Partly, but there's more to it. Jackson shifted, wincing at the pull on his healing wound. Harrington Sr., the railroad man, was a senator back then. He's the one who pushed through the legislation authorizing the forced relocations. All very legal, very proper on paper. But when his son was killed, people started asking questions. Uncomfortable questions about why soldiers were shooting at women and children. So he needed a scapegoat, Hannah concluded. The Navajo, Thomas. Exactly. And Charlie is living proof that Thomas was there that day, that he survived long enough to be identified. Jackson's expression was grim. If that story gets out, if people start questioning the official narrative, it could bring down Harrington's whole empire, Hannah finished. The railroad deals everything. Now you understand why he won't stop hunting that boy. Jackson's voice hardened, and why we can't let him succeed. The weight of this revelation settled between them, adding new urgency to their situation. It wasn't just about getting Charlie to safety anymore. It was about justice, about truth. What about the letter, Hannah asked suddenly, the one from Thomas that you never opened? Surprise flickered across Jackson's face. I left it at the cabin. It's probably gone now. What do you think it said? Jackson was silent for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted finally. Part of me was afraid to find out. Afraid it was a final condemnation from a man I respected more than any other. Or maybe forgiveness, Hannah suggested gently. Their eyes met across the small space between them, something unspoken passing between them. Hannah felt a flutter in her chest and a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. The moment was broken by a gust of wind that sent snow swirling into the cave entrance. Hannah rose to check that their barrier of branches was secure against the weather. Storm's getting worse, she observed. We should bank the fire for the night. Jackson watched her move about the cave with practiced efficiency, his expression thoughtful. Hannah, she paused, looking back at him. Yes. Thank you for staying, he gestured vaguely, everything. The simple sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. You're welcome, she replied softly. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's another day. As she settled into her own bed of furs, Hannah found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring, and all the tomorrows after that. The future stretched before them, uncertain and full of danger. But for now, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. And somehow that felt like enough. Outside, the storm raged on, blanketing the mountains in pristine white, erasing all traces of their presence. In the valley far below, Harrington and his men continued their search, unaware that their quarry had found sanctuary in the very heart of the mountain they sought to conquer. 2 weeks passed in the quiet sanctuary of the mountain cave. Outside, winter's grip tightened on the land, snow piling deeper with each passing storm. But within their stone shelter, warmed by the small fire and shared stories, Hannah and Jackson existed in a world of their own making. Jackson grew stronger by the day. Soon he was able to stand without assistance, then to move about the cave, his natural vitality reasserting itself despite the severity of his wounds. Hannah watched his recovery with both relief and a strange melancholy, knowing that each step toward healing brought them closer to rejoining the world beyond and all its complications. We should leave tomorrow, Jackson announced one evening as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew. The weather's clearing and I'm strong enough to travel. Hannah glanced at him skeptically. Are you sure that wound still needs time? It's had time, he interrupted gently. 2 weeks of your excellent care. But Charlie and Elena are waiting for us and Harrington is still out there. His expression grew serious. We can't hide forever, Hannah. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving their sanctuary filled her with an inexplicable dread. Here in this cave, they had found something precious, a connection, an understanding that transcended words. What would happen to that fragile bond once they returned to the world? Sarah left markers for us to follow, she said, finally focusing on practicalities. And we have enough provisions for several days' journey. Jackson nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. What is it, Hannah? What's troubling you? She hesitated, unsure how to express the tangle of emotions in her heart. I wonder what happens after. When Charlie is safe, when Elena is settled with her people. Where do we go then? Where do I go? Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. He set aside his bowl and moved to sit beside her, his large hand covering hers. Wherever we choose, he said simply. Together. The word hung between them, filled with possibility. Hannah searched his face, finding nothing but certainty in his steady gaze. Together, she repeated softly, the word a question and an answer all at once. Jackson's hand tightened on hers. If that's what you want. I know I'm not much a broken soldier with too many ghosts, but whatever future I have, I want to share it with you. It wasn't a declaration of love, not precisely, but in its quiet honesty, it touched Hannah more deeply than any passionate avowal could have. This man who had saved her from a life of drudgery and opened his world to her was now offering her a place in whatever future awaited them. Yes, she whispered, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. That's what I want too. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling away, a new understanding taking root. Jackson's free hand rose to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. Hannah leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, Jackson was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and touched his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a demand. But when Hannah responded, her hand rising to his beard-roughened cheek, it deepened into something more profound, a promise of beginning. When they finally drew apart, a smile touched Jackson's lips, the first true smile Hannah had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines carved by years of guilt and solitude. "We should get some rest," he said, though he made no move to release her hand. "Tomorrow will be a long day." That night, they slept side by side, sharing warmth and the quiet comfort of each other's presence. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the first hint of change in the mountain air. They left at dawn, the rising sun painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Jackson moved with careful deliberation, his wound still tender, but his strength returning. Hannah walked beside him, leading the single horse they had managed to recover, one of their pack animals that had returned to the cave days after their flight from Harrington. Sarah's markers were subtle but clear to those who knew what to look for: a branch positioned in a certain way, stones arranged in a pattern that would appear random to casual observers. They led northward toward the border where Navajo territory began. The day was clear but bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the air as they trudged through knee-deep snow. They spoke little, conserving energy and staying alert for any sign of pursuit. But the mountains seemed deserted, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a raven or the soft fall of snow from overburdened branches. By midday, they had descended into a sheltered valley following a frozen stream that wound between steep ridges. Jackson's pace had slowed, his face lined with fatigue, though he stubbornly refused to rest. "We should stop," Hannah suggested, noting how he pressed his hand against his wounded side. "Just for a little while." "Not yet," he replied, scanning the ridge above them. "This valley is too exposed. We need to reach the forest on the other side." Hannah was about to argue when a movement on the ridgeline caught her eye, a flash of color against the white there, and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. But Jackson had seen it too, his body tensing. "Down," he hissed, pulling her into the shelter of a rocky outcropping beside the stream. "Someone's up there." They crouched in the shadow of the rock, the horse stamping nervously beside them. Jackson's hand went to his rifle, though Hannah knew he was in no condition for another firefight. "Could it be Sarah's people?" she whispered. "Coming to meet us." "Maybe," but his tone suggested he thought otherwise. "Stay here. I'm going to circle around, get a better look." "No." Hannah caught his arm. "You're not strong enough yet. Let me go." Before he could protest, another movement drew their attention, a figure emerging from the trees at the valley's edge. Then another, and another. But they weren't Harrington's men or soldiers. They were women. 3 Navajo women moving cautiously down the slope toward them. The one in the lead was Sarah Many Horses. Jackson relaxed visibly, lowering his rifle. "It's all right," he said, standing to wave at the approaching women. "It's Sarah." Relief flooded through Hannah as she recognized their friend. But why had Sarah come to meet them? Was something wrong with Elena or Charlie? Sarah's face was grave as she reached them, her dark eyes taking in Jackson's condition with a healer's assessment. "You are healing well," she observed, "but not yet at full strength." "Strong enough," Jackson replied. "What's happened? Why are you here?" Sarah glanced at her companions, younger women, who hung back respectfully. "Elena sent me to find you. There have been developments." She looked around the exposed valley. "But not here. Come, our camp is just beyond those trees. We can talk safely there." They followed Sarah and the other women through the snow, crossing the valley to where the forest provided better cover. A small camp had been established in a clearing, just 2 hide-covered lodges and a carefully shielded fire. As they approached, the flap of one lodge opened and Elena emerged with Charlie in her arms. The boy's face lit up at the sight of them. "Mama Jackson!" he cried, squirming to be put down. Elena set him on his feet and he ran through the snow, his small legs churning until he reached Hannah, who knelt to catch him in a fierce embrace. "Hello, little one," she murmured, breathing in the scent of his hair. "I've missed you." "Missed you too," Charlie declared, then turned to Jackson, raising his arms imperiously. "Up, Jackson, up." Jackson's smile was tender as he carefully lifted the boy, mindful of his healing wounds. "You've grown, young man. Been eating well, I see." Charlie nodded solemnly. "Shima makes good food." He patted Jackson's beard. "You were sick. Better now." "Better now," Jackson affirmed, "thanks to your mama's good care." Elena approached more slowly, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "It is good to see you both well," she said, embracing Hannah. "We feared the worst when the storms came." "The cave kept us safe," Hannah replied. "But why did you send Sarah to find us? What's happened?" Elena exchanged a look with Sarah. "Many things. Come inside where it's warm. We have much to discuss." Inside the lodge, they settled around a small fire. Charlie nestled contentedly between Hannah and Jackson. The atmosphere was tense despite the warmth and the joy of reunion. "3 days ago, a rider came from Fort Cumberland," Elena began without preamble. "An old friend of my brother's, a white soldier named Reynolds." Jackson straightened. "Colonel Reynolds, my former commanding officer." Elena nodded. "The same. He came looking for you, Jackson. And for Charlie." "What did he want?" Jackson's voice had hardened, his arm tightening protectively around Charlie. "To warn us. And to help." Elena's expression was grave. "Harrington has convinced the territorial governor that Charlie is evidence in his son's murder. He has authorization to take the boy into custody and to arrest anyone harboring him." Hannah felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "That's absurd. Charlie was barely a year old when that happened. How could he be evidence?" "It doesn't matter if it makes sense," Jackson said grimly. "It's legal cover for what Harrington really wants: revenge and silencing any witness who might contradict the official story of his son's death." "There's more," Sarah interjected. "Reynolds brought documents. Letters between Senator Harrington and the military command ordering the attack on our village 3 years ago." Jackson's face went pale. "The senator gave the direct order, not the military command." Sarah nodded. "The letters prove it was a political decision, not a military necessity. Reynolds has kept them all this time, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth." "Why now?" Hannah asked. "After all this time?" "Because of us," Elena said softly. "Because we found Charlie. Because the story is unraveling." Jackson was silent, his expression unreadable, as he absorbed this new information. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Where is Reynolds now?" "He returned to the fort," Sarah replied. "He said he would gather more evidence, build a stronger case against the Harringtons. But he fears for his safety. If they discover what he knows, they'll silence him," Jackson finished. "Just like they've tried to silence all of us." A heavy silence fell over the lodge, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and Charlie's quiet breathing as he played with a small wooden toy, oblivious to the adults' concerns. "What do we do now?" Hannah asked finally. "Cross the border with Elena and Charlie as planned." Jackson shook his head slowly. "Running won't solve this. As long as Harrington has power, as long as the lie stands, Charlie and Elena will never be truly safe." His jaw set with determination. "We need to end this, once and for all." "How?" Elena asked. "Harrington is powerful. He has the law on his side." "Not if we expose the truth." Jackson's eyes met Hannah's. "Reynolds has the evidence. With his testimony, with the letters, we could bring the whole corrupt operation down." "You're talking about going back," Hannah said, realizing his intention. "Back to Fort Cumberland, back into danger." "Yes," he didn't try to soften it. "It's the only way." Hannah studied his face, seeing the resolve there, the need for redemption that drove him. This was about more than just Charlie now. It was about justice for Thomas, for all the Navajo who had suffered because of a powerful man's greed and another's blind obedience. "Then we'll go together," she said firmly. "All of us." "No," Jackson's voice was sharp. "Elena and Charlie need to cross the border, reach their people. They'll be safer there. And leave you to face Harrington alone." Elena shook her head. "Thomas would not want this. He would say that divided we fall." "Thomas isn't here," Jackson said, a flash of old pain crossing his face. "And I won't risk his son's life. Not again." The argument might have continued, but it was interrupted by Charlie, who had been watching the adults with growing concern. He climbed into Jackson's lap, his small face solemn. "Bad men coming?" he asked, his voice small. Jackson's expression softened as he looked down at the boy. "Yes, little warrior, bad men are coming, but we won't let them hurt you." Charlie considered this, then announced with the simple confidence of a child, "Jackson fight bad men. Mama and Shima help. All help." Out of the mouths of babes, Hannah thought. The simplicity of Charlie's solution, facing danger together rather than apart, laid bare the flaw in Jackson's thinking. They were stronger united than divided. He's right, she said quietly. We stand a better chance together. Jackson looked from Charlie to Hannah to Elena, seeing the same determination in all their faces. Finally, he sighed a sound of capitulation and perhaps relief. Together then, he agreed, but we'll need a plan. And help. Sarah, who had been silent during the exchange, spoke up. My cousins have gone to gather others, warriors who will stand with us. They will meet us at Grey Wolf Springs tomorrow. And I sent word to Reynolds through a trusted messenger, Elena added, asking him to meet us as well. Jackson's eyebrows rose. You've been busy. Elena's smile was grim. We Navajo know something about fighting against impossible odds, and about surviving. As night fell, they refined their plan. Rather than fleeing across the border, they would make a stand at Grey Wolf Springs, a sacred place to the Navajo, and one with a single approach that could be easily defended. There, with Reynolds and his evidence, they would confront Harrington on ground of their choosing. It was dangerous, perhaps foolhardy. But it offered a chance at a final resolution, a chance for truth to prevail over lies, for justice to be served, not just for Charlie, but for all who had suffered under the Harringtons' machinations. Later, as Hannah prepared for sleep, Charlie, already dozing beside Elena Jackson, drew her outside the lodge. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. It's not your fight, Hannah. You could still go with Elena and Charlie, be safe across the border. Hannah studied his face in the starlight, this man who had opened his life to her, who had offered her a future when she'd thought herself without one. It became my fight the moment I decided to help rescue Charlie, she said, the moment I chose to stand with you. Jackson's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, he said softly, and the most stubborn. I learned from the best, she replied with a hint of a smile. He drew her closer, his arms circling her waist. If we survive this. When we survive this, Hannah corrected. When we survive this, he amended. I want to build something new, something that isn't haunted by the past. His voice dropped lower. A home, a family, with you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of promise, of commitment beyond the danger that faced them. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so unexpected, so complete, that it left her breathless. Yes, she whispered, lifting her face to his. Yes to all of it. Their kiss was a seal on that promise, a moment of perfect understanding beneath the indifferent stars. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, not just as allies, but as partners bound by something stronger than fear or duty. As they returned to the lodge, Hannah caught sight of Elena watching them, a knowing smile on her lips. The Navajo woman nodded once in acknowledgement and a blessing. In that moment, Hannah felt a certainty she had never known before. They might not all survive the coming confrontation. The odds were long, the enemies powerful. But they were right to make this stand, right to fight for truth rather than flee from lies. And in that rightness, there was a kind of peace. Grey Wolf Springs lay in a natural amphitheater formed by ancient lava flows, the black rock rising in jagged formations that protected the valley on three sides. The spring itself bubbled up from a fissure in the rock, forming a small pool, before flowing away as a stream through the valley's only open side. To the Navajo, it was a sacred place where the spirit of the Grey Wolf was said to guard the boundary between worlds. To Jackson, it was a tactically ideal position, defensible with clear lines of sight and limited access. They arrived as the sun reached its zenith, having traveled since dawn through increasingly rugged terrain. Charlie rode with Elena, wrapped warmly against the cold. Hannah and Jackson followed on their single horse, conserving Jackson's strength for what lay ahead. Sarah's cousins had indeed been busy. A dozen Navajo warriors awaited them, men with hard eyes and rifles as well maintained as any soldiers. They greeted Elena with respect. Bordering on reverence, the sister of Thomas Two Rivers carried significant status among her people. Among them was an older man, his hair streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. He wore a mixture of traditional Navajo clothing and American military gear, a cavalry jacket over buckskin leggings. His eyes widened at the sight of Jackson. Captain Blackwood, he said, stepping forward. It has been many years. Jackson dismounted slowly, a recognition dawning on his face. Sergeant Begay, I thought you were dead. The man's smile was grim. Many thought so. It was safer that way after what happened at Whispering Canyon. Hannah watched the exchange with interest. Another piece of Jackson's past, other connection to the events that had shaped him. John Begay served with me and Thomas, Jackson explained to her as they made camp. He was with us the day of the attack on the village. I tried to stop it, Begay said quietly. Tried to make them see reason. But orders were orders. His gaze was knowing. You understand this burden, Captain. Jackson nodded, the old guilt visible in his eyes. Every day, Sergeant, every day. As the afternoon wore on, more allies arrived, not just Navajo warriors, but others who had reason to oppose Harrington and his railroad. There were Mexican vaqueros who had lost grazing lands, Chinese laborers who had fled railroad work gangs, even a few white settlers who had been cheated out of their land by the railroad's dubious legal maneuvers. By dusk, nearly 30 people had gathered at Grey Wolf Springs, a diverse army united by a common enemy. They established a perimeter, posted sentries, and prepared for whatever morning might bring. Reynolds should have been here by now, Jackson said as he and Hannah shared a simple meal by one of the small fires. I'm worried. Could he have been delayed by the weather? Hannah suggested. Or taken a different route to avoid being followed? Maybe. But Jackson's expression remained troubled. Or Harrington got to him. Without those letters, without his testimony. Hannah laid her hand on his arm. We'll find a way with or without Reynolds. We have other witnesses, Begay Elena you. Our word against a senator's son, against a powerful railroad. Jackson shook his head. We need more. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the valley entrance. One of the sentries was escorting someone into camp, a lone rider on a tired horse. But it wasn't Reynolds. It was Peterson, the old trader, who had brought them supplies at the cabin. He looked exhausted, his normally weathered face gray with fatigue. Jackson rose to meet him, helping the old man dismount. Didn't think I'd make it, Peterson wheezed, accepting a cup of coffee from one of the Navajo women. Roads are watched. Harrington's got men everywhere. What news? Jackson asked. Why have you come? Peterson reached into his coat, withdrawing a leather pouch. Reynolds sent me. Said to give you this no matter what. He handed the pouch to Jackson. He's been arrested, trumped up charges of treason and theft of government property. They're holding him at Fort Cumberland. Jackson opened the pouch, tipping its contents into his palm. Letters fell out, a half-dozen yellowed pages covered in official handwriting and bearing the seal of the United States Senate. And with them something else, a battered silver badge broken in half. Thomas's Army Scout badge, Jackson breathed, lifting the broken silver piece. He kept it all these years. Reynolds said you'd understand what it meant, Peterson said. Said it was time for both halves to come together. Hannah watched as Jackson reached into his own shirt, withdrawing the small leather pouch he always carried. From it, he removed the matching half of the broken badge. The two pieces fit together perfectly, forming a whole once more. Thomas broke it the day he left the army, Jackson explained, his voice thick with emotion. Gave me half, kept half, said when the pieces came together again, it would mean the circle was complete, justice served, balance restored. Reynolds believed that time has come, Peterson said. Those letters prove Senator Harrington ordered the attack on the Navajo village for his own financial gain. They prove the official story of Lieutenant Harrington's death was fabricated to cover up the truth that he was killed by friendly fire after ordering his men to fire on women and children. Jackson's face was grim as he scanned the letters. This is it, the evidence we needed. He looked up at Peterson. But with Reynolds imprisoned, who will testify to their authenticity? I will. Peterson's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. I was there too, Captain, serving as a civilian scout. I saw what happened that day. I've been waiting for a chance to set things right. A new hope kindled in Jackson's eyes. With the letters and Peterson's testimony, they had a real chance of exposing the truth. But Reynolds' arrest complicated matters. Harrington clearly knew they were gathering evidence against him and was moving to silence potential witnesses. Harrington's coming, Peterson warned, not just with his hired guns this time. He's convinced the territorial governor to send a company of cavalry claiming you're harboring hostile Indians, planning an uprising. How many men? Jackson asked. 50, maybe more, and they're not far behind me. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Even with their diverse allies, they were outnumbered and outgunned. And unlike Harrington's hired thugs, the cavalry soldiers would be following lawful orders, at least as far as they knew. "We need to get word to the fort commander," Jackson said finally. "Let him see these letters, understand what's really happening." "Begay and I can go," Sarah offered. "We know ways to reach the fort unseen." Jackson nodded gratefully. "Take the letters. Tell Colonel Marsh everything. He's a good man. If he sees evidence of corruption, he'll intervene." But even as plans were made, Hannah could see the doubt in Jackson's eyes. Even if Sarah and Begay reached the fort, even if Colonel Marsh believed them, help might come too late. Harrington and his forces would arrive by morning. They would have to make their stand here with what they had. As night deepened, final preparations were made. The non-combatants, including Elena and Charlie, were moved to the back of the valley, where caves in the rock face offered shelter and a potential escape route if things went badly. Defensive positions were established, weapons distributed, and watchfires lit to prevent a surprise attack. Hannah found herself helping Elena settle Charlie for the night in one of the small caves. The boy was overtired and frightened by the tension that pervaded the camp, clinging to both women and refusing to sleep. "Tell story," he demanded, his small face serious in the lantern light. "Story about Papa." Elena and Hannah exchanged a look. Charlie had been asking more questions about his father lately, sensing perhaps that Thomas Two Rivers was somehow central to the events unfolding around him. "Yes, little one," Elena said, settling beside him on the bedroll. "I will tell you about your father." As Charlie nestled against her, Elena began to speak, her voice soft but clear in the quiet cave. "Your father was a bridge between two worlds. He walked in the white man's world with his head held high, but he never forgot the ways of his people." Her hand stroked Charlie's dark hair. "He believed in justice, in truth, in the power of one person to make a difference." Hannah listened, moved by the simple eloquence of Elena's words. She was painting a picture of Thomas not just as a victim or a martyr, but as a man of principle, of courage. "Your father saved many lives," Elena continued, "both Navajo and white. He believed we could live together in peace if only we tried to understand each other." Her voice caught slightly. "That is why the bad men feared him, because he showed that their lies were not necessary." Charlie's eyes were growing heavy, but he fought sleep, captivated by his mother's words. "Jackson knew Papa." "Yes," Elena said, glancing at Hannah. "They were friends once, brothers in spirit though not in blood. And now Jackson fights for what your father believed in, that truth is stronger than lies, that justice is worth any sacrifice." By the time Elena finished her story, Charlie had finally succumbed to sleep, his small body relaxed in innocent slumber. The two women sat in companionable silence, each lost in her own thoughts. "He is so like Thomas," Elena said, finally looking down at her son. "Not just in appearance, but in spirit. So determined, so curious about everything." "He's remarkable," Hannah agreed. "You've raised him well despite everything." Elena's smile was tinged with sadness. "I had help, first from you, then from Sarah and our people." She looked at Hannah directly. "And now from you again. It seems our lives are woven together by this child." "I hope that doesn't complicate things," Hannah said hesitantly. "My feelings for Charlie, for Jackson." "Why should love ever complicate?" Elena asked simply. "Charlie has room in his heart for many. So do I." She reached out to touch Hannah's hand. "My brother would be pleased to see the family forming around his son. A family not of blood, but of choice." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple acceptance in Elena's words. "Thank you," she whispered. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Jackson's arrival at the cave entrance. His face was grave as he ducked inside. "Our scouts report movement to the north," he said without preamble. "Harrington and his forces will reach the valley by dawn." Elena's expression remained calm, though her hand tightened on Charlie's sleeping form. "Then we must be ready." Jackson nodded, his eyes meeting Hannah's. "Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow will test us all." But as he turned to leave, Hannah followed him outside. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamond dust across the black sky. Watchfires burned at intervals around the valley, their light reflecting off the snow. "You should be with Charlie and Elena," Jackson said, though he made no move to send her away. "I wanted to be with you," Hannah replied simply, "just for a moment." His expression softened as he looked at her, this woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly and changed everything. Without words, he opened his arms, and Hannah stepped into his embrace, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating strong and steady, despite the danger that faced them. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. Jackson was silent for a moment, considering. "Not of dying," he said finally. "I've faced that possibility too many times to fear it much anymore." His arms tightened around her. "But I am afraid of failing, of letting down Charlie, Elena, you." Hannah leaned back to look up at him. "You won't fail. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. And that means we have already won something important." A smile touched his lips. "When did you get so wise, Hannah Reed?" "I've had a good teacher," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. It was a kiss of affirmation, of promise, of shared strength. When they parted, something had settled between them, a certainty that transcended the uncertainty of the coming dawn. "Get some sleep," Jackson said, touching her cheek gently. "I'll wake you before first light." Hannah returned to the cave, settling beside Charlie's sleeping form. Elena was already dozing, one arm protectively around her son. Despite the hard ground and the knowledge of what morning would bring, Hannah fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. It seemed only moments later that Jackson's hand on her shoulder woke her. The cave was dark, the lantern extinguished, but she could sense rather than see his tension. "They're here," he whispered, "earlier than expected." Hannah rose quickly, careful not to disturb Charlie and Elena. Outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one. But it wasn't dawn that illuminated the valley entrance. It was torches, dozens of them carried by mounted men. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that clutched at her heart. "At least 40, Jackson replied grimly. "Cavalry and Harrington's private men. They're forming up for a charge." Hannah could see their allies taking up defensive positions behind rocks in the shallow trenches they dug the previous day, anywhere that offered cover. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of position and the rightness of their cause. "What about Sarah and Begay?" "Any word?" Jackson shook his head. "Nothing yet. We're on our own for now." A rider separated from the mass at the valley entrance, approaching under a white flag. Even at a distance, Hannah recognized the elegant figure of Victor Harrington. "He wants to parley," Jackson said, his expression skeptical. "Stay here. Keep watch over Elena and Charlie." "Be careful," Hannah urged, touching his arm. "Don't trust him." Jackson's smile was grim. "I never have." Hannah watched anxiously as Jackson walked out to meet Harrington in the neutral ground between the two forces. The men's breath formed white clouds in the cold morning air as they spoke, too distant for her to hear their words. But she could read the tension in Jackson's posture, the barely contained anger. After several minutes, Jackson turned and walked back toward their lines, his face set in hard lines. Harrington remained where he was watching. "What did he say?" Hannah asked as soon as Jackson reached her. "The usual. Surrender the boy, and Elena and the rest of us can go free." Jackson's voice was tight with controlled rage. "He claims to have legal authority to take Charlie into custody as a material witness. Says anyone who resists will be treated as an enemy of the state. And if we refuse?" Jackson's eyes met hers. "Then they attack with the full backing of the territorial government." "Did you tell him about the letters about Peterson's testimony?" "I did." A muscle worked in Jackson's jaw. He laughed. "Said no one would believe a drunken old traitor and some forged letters over the word of a respected businessman and the son of a senator." Hannah felt cold despite the rising sun. "So that's it. We fight." Jackson was silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over their assembled allies. The Navajo warriors, the Mexican vaqueros, the Chinese laborers, the few white settlers who had chosen to stand with them. A small, diverse army united by a common cause. "Not yet," he said finally. "There's one more card to play." He turned to Elena, who had emerged from the cave, Charlie in her arms. "Are you ready?" Elena's face was calm, determined. "Yes, it is time." Hannah looked between them, confused. "Time for what? What are you planning?" Instead of answering directly, Jackson called to Peterson, who had been waiting nearby. "Bring him." The old trader disappeared into one of the caves, returning moments later with another man, tall, gaunt, his face half hidden by a gray beard. He wore buckskins, like many of the white settlers, but there was something in his bearing, his eyes, that struck Hannah as familiar. "Who is he?" she asked, though a suspicion was already forming in her mind. "Someone Harrington won't be expecting," Jackson replied. He turned to the stranger. Are you sure about this? Once you step forward, there's no going back. The man's voice was hoarse as if long unused. I've been hiding too long already. It's time for the truth. With that, he stepped forward, moving past Jackson toward the valley entrance where Harrington waited. Elena followed Charlie, still in her arms, her head held high. After a moment's hesitation, Jackson and Hannah fell in beside them, forming a small procession that advanced into the open ground between the two forces. Harrington watched their approach with visible confusion, then growing disbelief as the bearded man drew closer. His face drained of color, his hand going to his pistol. No, he breathed. It's impossible, you're dead. The bearded man stopped a few paces away, standing straight, despite the visible effort it cost him. Hello, Harrington. It's been a long time. Thomas Two Rivers, Harrington said, his voice barely audible. You died at Whispering Canyon. My son. Your son gave the order to fire on women and children, Thomas said, his voice gaining strength. When I tried to stop him, he drew his pistol. In the struggle, it discharged, killing him instantly. Lies. Harrington's control was cracking. You murdered my boy. You shot him in cold blood. I tried to save him from himself, Thomas countered, from the hatred his father had taught him. But I failed. His gaze was steady, just as I failed to save my people from your greed. Harrington's face contorted with rage. You expect anyone to believe this? The word of a savage against a respected family, against progress itself. Not just his word. Jackson stepped forward, producing the letters Peterson had brought. These orders, signed by your father, prove the attack on the Navajo settlement was politically motivated, designed to clear the land for your railroad. And not just the letters, Peterson added, moving to stand beside Thomas. My testimony as a witness, and the testimony of Colonel Reynolds, who kept copies of all the correspondence. Reynolds is in custody, Harrington sneered. He'll never testify. But I will, came a new voice from behind them. Hannah turned to see a column of cavalry entering the valley, not from the direction of Harrington's forces, but from the opposite side where the caves provided a secondary access. At their head rode a distinguished officer in full uniform, his chest decorated with medals. Colonel Marsh, Jackson breathed. Sarah and Begay got through. The fort commander rode forward, his face stern as he surveyed the scene. Mr. Harrington, he said coldly, I have orders for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted kidnapping. Harrington's composure crumbled. This is outrageous. I have authorization from the governor himself. The governor has been informed of new evidence. Marsh cut him off. Evidence that suggests you and your father have engaged in a systematic campaign of deception for personal gain. He gestured to his men. Lieutenant, take Mr. Harrington into custody. As soldiers moved to surround Harrington, he made one last desperate attempt. Drawing his pistol, he lunged toward Charlie, still held in Elena's arms. If I can't have justice, I'll have vengeance, he cried. Everything happened in an instant. Thomas moved to shield his sister and son. Jackson leaped forward, tackling Harrington just as the pistol fired. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun discharging again as they struggled. When they finally separated, Harrington lay still, blood spreading across his chest from where his own bullet had struck him in their struggle. Jackson knelt beside him, checking for signs of life, then looked up and shook his head. He's gone, he said simply. A heavy silence fell over the valley, broken only by Charlie's frightened whimpers. Elena soothed him, murmuring gentle words in Navajo, while Thomas stood nearby, his face a mask of complicated emotions. Colonel Marsh dismounted, approaching the small group. I'm sorry it ended this way, he said, genuine regret in his voice. We wanted to bring him to proper justice. Perhaps this was justice, Thomas said quietly. Of a kind. The colonel turned to Jackson, extending his hand. Captain Blackwood, it's been a long time. Jackson rose, accepting the handshake. Too long, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank your Navajo friends, Marsh replied with a nod towards Sarah and Begay, who had appeared with his troops. They made a compelling case. And the letters? He shook his head. Damning evidence. The senator will have much to answer for. What happens now? Hannah asked, moving to Jackson's side. Justice, I hope, the colonel said. A full investigation into the Harrington Railroad dealings, restitution for the Navajo whose lands were illegally seized, and, he looked at Thomas, a formal exoneration for Thomas Two Rivers, whose only crime was trying to protect his people. Thomas inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than gratitude. And my people, will they be allowed to return to their lands? That's beyond my authority, Marsh admitted, but I will advocate for it. With the evidence we now have, there's a strong case to be made. It wasn't everything they had hoped for, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of injustice that had seemed impenetrable just days before. Hannah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a cautious hope taking root. She looked around at the unlikely family they had formed. Jackson standing tall despite his still healing wounds. Thomas reunited with his sister and son after years in hiding. Elena with Charlie secure in her arms. Sarah and the other Navajo who had risked everything for justice. They had faced impossible odds and emerged, if not victorious, then at least unbowed. The sun had fully risen now, its light gilding the snow-covered valley, turning the harsh landscape into something beautiful. A new day, Hannah thought. A new beginning. 1 month later, spring came early to the high country snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the dark earth. The cabin on Mercy Mountain had survived the winter abandoned, though it required substantial repairs to be habitable again. Jackson worked from dawn to dusk, replacing damaged roof beams, mending the stone chimney, rebuilding what had been lost. Hannah worked alongside him, her strength and determination a perfect complement to his skill. Together, they transformed the cabin from a solitary man's refuge to a true home, a place of warmth and welcome. A second structure had begun to take shape nearby, a traditional Navajo dwelling, its entrance facing east to greet the morning sun. Thomas and Elena had decided to stay at least until the legal matters were fully resolved. The land around Mercy Mountain was in dispute now, the Harrington Railroad claims under investigation. But Colonel Marsh had ensured that for the time being, no one would disturb the small settlement forming in the shadow of the peak. Charlie flourished in the mountain air, running between the two dwellings as if they were simply different rooms in the same home. He called Thomas Papa, now the word no longer unfamiliar on his tongue, but he still sought out Jackson for horseback rides, still climbed into Hannah's lap for stories before bed. On a particularly fine morning in late April, Hannah stood on the porch of the cabin, watching as Jackson taught Charlie how to split kindling with a small hatchet. The boy's face was scrunched in concentration, his small hands careful under Jackson's guidance. "He's a natural," Thomas said, coming to stand beside her, just like his mother. Hannah smiled. She and Thomas had developed an easy friendship over the past weeks, bound by their shared love for Charlie and their respect for each other's place in his life. "Elena said you received a letter from Colonel Marsh," she said. "Any news?" Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The investigation continues. Senator Harrington has resigned in disgrace, claiming ill health. The railroad land grants are being reviewed by the territorial court." A small smile touched his lips. "And my name has been officially cleared. I am no longer a wanted man." "That's wonderful, Thomas." Hannah touched his arm, genuinely happy for him. "And what will you do now?" "Return to your people." He was silent for a moment, watching his son laugh as Jackson lifted him onto his shoulders. "My people are here," he said finally. "Elena, Charlie, Sarah, and the others who have chosen to stay." He glanced at her. "You and Jackson." "You're welcome here," Hannah assured him, "for as long as you want to stay." "Thank you." Thomas hesitated, then added, "Jackson has asked me to be his business partner. He wants to breed horses, establish a proper ranch here." Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. Jackson hadn't mentioned this to her. "And what did you say?" "I said I would consider it." Thomas's expression was serious. "It would mean putting down roots here, building something permanent. Elena is in favor of it too. She says Charlie needs stability, a chance to grow up knowing both sides of his heritage." "I think it's a wonderful idea," Hannah said warmly. "Jackson knows horses, and you know people. You'd make good partners." Thomas smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his solemn face. "That is what Elena said. She is usually right about such things." They fell into companionable silence, watching as Jackson showed Charlie how to stack the split kindling. The boy was chattering away, asking questions that Jackson answered with patient good humor. "He will be a good father," Thomas observed quietly. Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, he will." Thomas gave her a knowing look. "He loves you very much, you know, even if he doesn't say it often." "He doesn't need to say it," Hannah replied. "He shows it every day." Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Jackson found Hannah in the garden behind the cabin. She was on her knees in the freshly turned earth, planting seedlings for summer vegetables. "Need some help?" he offered, crouching beside her. "Always," she smiled, handing him a trowel. "These tomato plants need to go along the south wall where they'll get the most sun." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the simple act of planting, creating a sense of permanence, of future. Hannah found herself thinking of harvests to come, of summer evenings, sharing meals from their own garden of winters, preserved in jars on root cellar shelves. "I spoke with Thomas today," Jackson said eventually, "about the horse breeding operation." "He mentioned it to me," Hannah replied. "I think it's a fine idea." Jackson looked relieved. "I should have discussed it with you first. It would mean committing to staying here, building for the long term." Hannah set down her trowel, turning to face him fully. "Jackson Blackwood, if you think for one moment that I want to be anywhere but here with you, then you haven't been paying attention." A smile broke across his face, transforming his rugged features. "Is that so, Miss Reed?" "It is, Mr. Blackwood." She brushed dirt from her hands. "In fact, I was thinking we might need to expand the cabin a bit, add another room or two." "Oh." His eyebrows rose in question. "Planning on taking in boarders, are we?" Hannah's smile was mysterious. "Not exactly, but Thomas and Elena aren't the only ones who might need space for a growing family." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Jackson's expression shifted from confusion to wonder. "Hannah, are you saying—" She nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I suspected for a week or so. Sarah confirmed it yesterday." Jackson seemed frozen, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then, with a gentleness that belied his size, he gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of glass. "A child," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Hannah held him just as tightly, feeling the strong beat of his heart against her cheek. "A new beginning," she said softly. "Another chance, well." Later, as twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, the entire small community gathered around a fire outside the cabin. Charlie sat on Thomas's lap, listening wide-eyed as Elena told a traditional Navajo story. Sarah and some of the others who had chosen to stay at Mercy Mountain sat nearby, adding details to the tale when Elena paused. Jackson and Hannah sat slightly apart, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. They had shared their news, receiving congratulations and knowing smiles. Charlie had been particularly excited, declaring he would teach the baby everything he knew, a prospect that amused the adults given that he was barely 3 himself. As night fell and stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey that had begun on that dusty town square, where a giant of a man had tossed a silver dollar to buy a woman no one else wanted, had led them here to this moment, this place, this family forged not of blood, but of choice and circumstance and love. "Happy," Jackson murmured, his lips close to her ear. Hannah looked around at the circle of fire-lit faces, Thomas and Elena, Charlie drowsing between them, Sarah and the others who had risked everything for justice, and Jackson beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. In a world that had shown her little but cruelty for most of her life, she had found not just safety, but belonging, not just shelter, but home. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward to mingle with the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But for tonight on this mountain that had offered mercy when it was most needed, they were together. And that was enough. Peterson arrived the following week, his wagon loaded with supplies for the growing settlement. Among the items he brought was a hand-carved sign, a gift from the people of Silverton, who had heard the full story of what happened at Grey Wolf Springs. Jackson mounted it at the entrance to the valley, where all who came would see its simple message: "Mercy among the hills, all are welcome here." It stood as a testament to what they had built, not just cabins and corrals, but a community, a sanctuary where wounded souls could heal, where different worlds could meet in understanding rather than conflict, where mercy had the final word. And in the years that followed, as children played in the shadow of the mountain and horses grazed in the valley below, those words remained true, a promise kept, a vision realized, a new story written on land that had seen too much sorrow. For Hannah and Jackson, for Thomas and Elena, for Charlie, and all who came after it was more than enough. It was everything.